Chapter 201. After the vacation. It has been a few days since Tatsuya and the others came back to Kuo, and currently Tatsuya and his group were on their way to the academy since their vacation have come to an end. Well, seriously, it is still hard for me to believe that our vacation just came to an end like that. I mean, it feels like it was just a couple of days since the school was closed. Tatsuya looked at the girls who were discussing among themselves and said, "What do you mean by that? Didn't we experience all we could do in summer vacation? Going to a beach, amusement park, Grammary Mansion, etc." Hearing that, all of their brows twitched and all of them said in unison, "Yeah, but being strapped to a band which does not even allow to walk properly was not something you would do on a vacation. Not to mention how many times our skin got burnt." All of them nodded their head and glared at Tatsuya. Tatsuya just shrugged it off and said, "You should be thanking me. You got strong because of that. Not to mention you were able to last longer in our night sessions as well. And keeping that matter aside, you all had your fair share of fun as well, right?" All of them then nodded their heads but still glared at Tatsuya and said, "Even so, it still sucks." Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Then in compensation of that, let's have a trip later this year. Just us and nobody else. An exclusive group trip for our team. How about it? No training as well." Hearing that, all of them cheered up and nodded their heads with enthusiasm. But then Tatsuya noticed something and looked at Miyuki and asked, "What happened, Miyuki? You were spacing out a bit." Miyuki, who was concentrating on something, looked at Tatsuya and said, "Nothing, Oni-sama. Just felt something unusual." Tatsuya then concentrated as well and then noticed something and said, "I understand," and kept walking, making others a bit curious. Later, when everyone were in their classes, everyone else felt something as well, and all of them except for Miyuki had a wry smile on their faces while they thought, "So this is what Miyuki called unusual," while Miyuki thought, "So the trash is here." Soon the teacher in Tatsuya's class entered along with an orange-haired twin-tailed girl behind her, which made Zenobia and Isami a bit surprised seeing her here. The teacher then motioned the girl to introduce herself to the others. The girl then took a step forward and smiled and said, "Hello, everyone, my name is Irina Shido, and I will be studying with you all from now on. I hope that we all can get along well." The whole class went into uproar with boys celebrating that a hot girl joined their class while the girls discussing how cute Irina was. The teacher then silenced the class and motioned Irina to take a seat beside Isami. Irina then happily sat beside Isami and then talked to the others. Currently in the ORC, all the members were assembled on the room and were looking at the two girls who were staring at each other for a while, though Tatsuya was not interested in it and was currently gaming along with Gasper. Miyuki, who was smiling while looking at her childhood friend, said, "So I see that some international trash is sent here today." Irina smiled as well and said, "Oh, I heard that there was an icy garbage bin here, so I just came to check how it looked like." Miyuki's lips twitched and she said, Then I can dump the trash in that bin. It would be an honor for the trash to be dumped in that bin." Irina chuckled and said, So you have been picking trash as a part-time lately, Miyuki?" Miyuki just placed a hand on her. He said, "Well, there have been a lot of garbage here, so someone have to take care of it. And currently I have an itch of throwing some international trash back to their country." And her aura slightly released. Tatsuya, who noticed that, said, "Miyuki, don't kill her. She is our friend," and continued to play the game. Miyuki just clicked her tongue but soon smiled and said, "What you may be talking about, Oni-sama. I'm not a person who will kill like that. I will torture them in a freezing hell till they die," thought Miyuki. The girls in Tatsuya's group then thought at the same time. Her thoughts can be clearly heard by us. Rias then separated the two and then began discussing about why Irina came to Japan. Miyuki just ignored them and sat beside Tatsuya and lied in his lap. Irina, who noticed this, had her brows twitching and she thought, "Why do I feel like she is doing it intentionally?" But soon their eyes met and Miyuki showed a victorious smirk to her, seeing what she thought. She is totally doing it with intention. Irina then ignored her and started talking with Zenobia and the others and told them about her becoming an angel and revealed her wings. Seeing that, the Grammary group were a bit surprised and started to ask her about it. Irina, who was receiving attention because of her being an angel, puffed her chest and said, "I am an ace, you know, and that too of Michael-sama, a dash." But before she could continue, Miyuki said, "Don't think much about it. She just the same. The only difference in her is that previously she was shit and now she is holy shit." And started playing a game as well while lying on Tatsuya's lap. The whole room got silent and looked at the siblings, not giving a fuck to what they all were doing and concentrating on their games. They then turned towards Irina, who was fuming with anger, but was somehow controlling herself. Tatsuya then said, "Don't take her words at face value. She is just saying that even if you are an angel now, from the inside you are the same Irina as before." And continued to play while Miyuki just blushed in embarrassment and looked away from all of them and hid her face in Tatsuya's abdomen while hugging him. Seeing that the rest of them chuckled while Irina just smiled, Tatsuya just patted Miyuki's head and kept the game aside. After all of them calmed down, Rias decided to hold a celebration for the joining of new member in the club and started preparing. Asia, Isami, and Kagura decided to go for grocery shopping while Tatsuya just went with Kiba to set up the table and all in the clubroom. Tatsuya, who felt someone in his territory, smirked and sent a telepathic message to Kagura. Kagura, who felt her link connect with Tatsuya, didn't took any time and said, "Yeah, the Astaroth bastard is just in front of us." Chapter 202. Confronting Diodora, 1. After Asia, Isami and Kagura left the ORC for buying the groceries. While returning back, all of them stopped once they heard a voice. "Hello." All of them turned around and saw a black-haired man whose eyes were barely open and had a smile on his face, giving off a friendly aura. Suddenly Kagura felt her link connect with Tatsuya's and informed him about the devil's arrival. Isami noticed the demonic energy coming out of Diodora and immediately took a distance from him and said, "A devil, what are you doing here?" Hearing that, Asia raised his hand to stop Isami from doing anything in public and said, "Isami, be aware of your surroundings before you take any actions." Hearing the two of them, Diodora frowned a bit and said, "Don't you remember me?" Hearing that, Isami got confused and looked at the male in front of him for a while, and soon she realized something and said, "Ah, I know you. You were the one whom we met in the youth meet. You were trying to hit on Asia but were immediately shut down by her before you could even give your name." Diodora's brows twitched on hearing Isami talk about him like that, and he immediately wanted to attack her, but still remained calm. Diodora just smiled and said, "Do you mind coming with me for a while, Asia-san?" But Asia just turned around and said, "Sorry, there is some work that we have to do." Seeing her walk away without even considering his offer, Diodora felt pissed but didn't show his expression on his face. Seeing her walk away, Isami and Kagura just gave a curt bow and followed behind Asia. But soon all three of them noticed him following them. Diodora caught up to them and said, "Then you don't mind if we converse while you are your way back, right? Let me introduce myself. I am Diodora Astaroth, a devil from the house of Astaroth." Seeing that they could not shake him off, they just introduced themselves to him and just gave vague answers to his questions. They wanted to just beat the crap out of the guy following them but stopped themselves as they were in public places, and unlike them, if Diodora was an arrogant prick who would not even care about harming the humans near them. Plus there would be some problems from the devil side who will rant out on how 3 little girls ganged up on a high-ranking devil and humiliated him in front of the others. Something which would only give Tatsuya a headache, which they do not want to do. Tatsuya, who heard the matter from Kagura, said that if they want they can dispose him and he will take care of the matter, but Asia rejected his offer and said that there was no meaning for him to do something like that, as it would just be bothersome. Tatsuya then thought for a while and then gave Sona a call and said, "Hey Sona, are you and the student council free right now?" Sona then thought for a while and then said, "Well, we are mostly done with our work, just the devil stuff is left. Is there something that you want my help with?" "Nah, just wanted to ask whether you wanted to join us at the ORC for a small party. It would be fun if all of you joined as well." Sona thought for a while and then said, "Very well then. It can be considered as a reward for my peerage who have worked hard during the whole vacation. Fine, we will be there in 15 minutes. Tatsuya then ended the call and told Rias about the student council, who immediately approved of it as her friend was joining them as well. A few minutes later, Asia and the others came back with Diodora behind them as well, seeing which Rias and the Gremory group was confused. Tatsuya then said, well, what do we have here?" Diodora gave a bow and said, "Hello everyone. I am Diodora Astaroth from the Astaroth clan. I hope that I didn't bother you?" Rias came forward and said, No, it is fine, but what is the reason for your sudden visit?" Diodora turned around to look at Asia and said, "Well, I just came to meet the person I love." Hearing that, everyone frowned and Zenovia said, Why you love Gasper?" After which the already motionless Gasper started crying and hid behind Tatsuya for protection. Diodora got completely shocked by what he heard and opened his eyes only to notice that Asia was not standing there, and in her place there was a small vampire girl. He then looked around the room and saw Asia talking to Tatsuya with a smile on her face, which immediately infuriated him. Diodora then waved his hands and said, No, I'm talking about Asia, not the vampire girl." Gasper, who was standing behind Tatsuya, said, I am a BB boy, and I am not interested in you." Asia then turned around and said, "I already told you that day. I already have a boyfriend," and liked her arms with Tatsuya's. Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, "You heard her, man." But Diodora totally ignored Tatsuya and said, "Asia-san, do you really not remember me?" Asia, without taking any time, said, "Nope." Hearing which, the whole Gremory group looked at Diodora with pity. Diodora sighed and took his robe off and opened a few buttons of his shirt and revealed his chest with a deep scar on it, along with some prosthetics attached to his body. Seeing the scar, the whole room remained silent, but soon Asia broke the ice and said, "Sorry, but even if you are ready to sell your body, then too I am not interested in you. You can wear your clothes," which made the whole atmosphere around the room completely awkward. But soon most of them just kept their hands on their mouths so as to not laugh at the bare-chested devil. Diodora, who was completely shocked by Asia's answer, said in disbelief, Did you really don't remember? You were the one who treated this scar." "Yes." But Asia said, "Even if I treated you, there is no way that I can remember all the ones whom I have healed. There are way too many of them. Sorry about that," and gave a helpless smile. Diodora just shook his head and said, "No, that's understandable, but still I wish to let you know that at that moment I fell in love with you. It was just as if my destiny." But then the door was opened and the student council lead by Sona came in, with all of them being completely serious as they already felt a devil's presence inside the room. Sona, who noticed Diodora without his shirt, looked at the others for answer, to which Tatsuya said, "Don't mind him, the man here is to get rejected for the second time." Tatsuya then looked at Diodora and said, "Oh, and regarding Asia being the one healing you, are you the one because of whom she was banished from the church?" To which Diodora just got dejected and said, "I am really sorry about that, and that is also one of my reasons why I want to hell dash." Tatsuya then said, "Just leave it at that. There is one thing that I wanted to ask. Why the hell will a devil, much less someone from a high-ranking house, go to Vatican, the HQ of heavens? Not to mention it was Duriji that time when the 3 biblical factions were not even at peace." Hearing that all of them remained silent and looked at the devil for answers, even Rias and Sona, along with their queens, narrowed their eyes at him, because now there is a possibility of him being a traitor. Sona adjusted her glasses and said, "Really? Now even I want to know about this matter." Rias folded her hands under her breasts and said, Now don't be like that. Let's have a seat and then we can have a nice long talk." Diodora, who was now confronted by the two heiresses, now knew that he cannot get away easily. Chapter 203. Confronting Diodora, 2. Currently Diodora was seated on a sofa and was surrounded by people from the Grimoire, Citri, and Shiba group, while the leaders were sitting on front of him with Tatsuya being in the middle of the two girls. Tatsuya, who was smiling, said, "Don't be nervous, we won't bite." Hearing that, Diodora thought, limps anyone would be able to keep his cowl when surrounded by so many people. But still he smiled and said, "Yeah, I know you won't." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Then please go ahead." Diodora then said, "I know what you all might be thinking, but know that I am not a traitor who gives information to the church or heaven. I was looking around for people to join my peerage, but messed up in my teleportation and ended up there." Tatsuya then said, "Out of all places around the world you teleported in your enemy's HQ. Sucks to be you." Hearing that, everyone nodded their heads, but Sona and Rias were still dissatisfied with his answer. Sona looked at Rias, who looked back at her and shook her head. Sona asked, "Are you really speaking the truth?" Diodora nodded and said, "Yeah, that is true. What would I even gain from going at places like that?" Tatsuya then said, Now Sona, don't pressure the guy. He was just unlucky. By the way, Astaroth-san, there is something else I would like to ask." Tatsuya then said, "Have you learned to teleport to your desired location?" To which Diodora nodded his head. Tatsuya just smiled and asked, "You see, during the youth meet I saw that most of your peerage were nuns, which got me a bit curious, so I checked it up with Michael and came to know that all of them were banished from the church as well." Hearing that, immediately all of them looked at Diodora and narrowed their eyes, except for Tatsuya, who had a friendly smile on his face. "You must be a really nice guy to give all those nuns a home after they were banished." Diodora's brows twitched as he felt angered by how Tatsuya was playing with him, and he said, "Yeah, I just want to help them." Tatsuya nodded in approval and said, "Yeah, you really are doing a good job. You know, I even come to know that the reasons of banishment, though different, had something in common. They all were related to a devil somehow." Diodora started to get angrier seeing how the human in front of him was acting. He really wanted to just kill him, but knew that it will do more harm than good to him. Diodora just smiled and said, "Well, that is the reason why I decided to help them, as they were harmed by a member of my race." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Now on to the stuff which I care about." Suddenly all the people in the room felt a strong pressure on their bodies and became stiff. Tatsuya, who has been smiling this whole time, was looking coldly at Diodora, who immediately started sweating on seeing the look in his eyes. Tatsuya then asked in a cold tone, "With whose permission did you get your ass here in my territory?" Rias, who was sitting beside Tatsuya, then thought, "He is a goner." Diodora wanted to glare and make the human know his place, but unlike the other times where he was controlling himself to take these actions, this time he was totally unable to do so. His whole body was unable to move, and he could not even match his eyes to Tatsuya's cold gaze. Tatsuya then said, "Not only did you enter my territory without my permission, but also stalked Asia. You know, I really want to know, from whom did you got these guys from? Shall I kill you?" Hearing that, all of them except for Tatsuya's group were shocked when they heard Tatsuya openly saying to kill him. Diodora glared back at Tatsuya, but was not able to speak anything, seeing which Tatsuya lowered the pressure so that the devil could speak. Diodora then said, "Just because you were able to defeat a councilman with that weapon of yours, don't AC dash." Tatsuya then immediately took out his Excalibur, and immediately all the devils in the room felt a burning sensation except for Zenobia, but the one who was experiencing the hell was Diodora, whose holy resistance was near zero because of Tatsuya. See Chapter 71 if you forgot. He felt his whole body burning just because the sword was near him. Tatsuya smirked and said, "What were to saying? I didn't hear you," and moved the sword closer to Diodora's neck, making the said devil jump back from his place. Diodora gritted his teeth and said, "Don't act cocky, just because you have a holy sword. Just be prepared for the consequences. The Astaroth clan will not let this slide. Not to mention that one of our house members is a Mao as well." Tatsuya just smiled and said, "You know, I should ask Ajuka and Surzex about whether they have any records of sending any devil to Vatican or not. Michael and the others should be knowing about this as well." Hearing that, Diodora's face immediately got pale. If Ajuka and the others came to KO about him, then it would totally spoil the plan the Cows Brigade is making about attacking the underworld. He would be put in suspicion, and his raiding games where he plans on starting the attack will be lost. Diodora gritted his teeth and immediately teleported away. Once he was gone, Sona immediately stood up and asked, "Why did you let him leave?" Tatsuya just put Excalibur away and said, There was no point in keeping him here anyway. He is not my responsibility. As long as he stays away from my territory and those dear to me, I don't care if he even becomes a Mao." Tatsuya then went to a corner and filled a cup with tea and took a sip and said, "Besides, it should be obviously clear to the higher-ups as well about what game he is playing, except for the Cows Brigade part. They are not foolish, they are overly biased and are just looking over it." Hearing that, both the heiresses narrowed their eyes and Sona asked, "What do you mean by biased? We devils always do things fairly." Tatsuya just took a seat beside Kaneko and said, "So Tan, you are too young to KO how dark politics can get, and that too politics of the devils who thinks that all other races are lower than theirs. You all are even ready to wipe out an entire race just because someone of that race killed a high-ranking devil. Hearing which Rias and all those who were aware of what he was talking about looked at Kaneko, who looked down with a sad expression on her face. Tatsuya just rubbed her head and said, "Sorry about making you remember something sad." But Kaneko just shook her head and said that it was all right. Tatsuya then said, "And it is also not my place to say something about it when the victim itself is remaining silent. Devils aren't the only ones her to blame. The church too is at fault." And immediately Zenobia and Irina looked at Tatsuya in disbelief. Tatsuya looked at Irina and said, "Don't look at me like that. The church is not pure as you think it is. There are a lot of unmentionable things that have been done by the church, for example dash." He then looked at Kiba and said, "The Holy Sword Project," and immediately Kiba clenched his fists. Tatsuya then said, "The children who were a part of the Sword Project were just killed, just because they were not able to show any results, and not that instead of apologizing and helping the children the church vanished the one who have made in charge of the project who in turn to save himself killed every one of his test subjects. But still the church is using the research if the said person to make holy sword wielders." Tatsuya then kept his cup down and then said, "You see it is easier for the factions to place the blame on someone else rather than taking responsibility for it. So I hardly believe that something much would be happening to the devil." Tatsuya then stood up and said, "Well, I don't think that anyone is in the mood for celebration right now, so let's do it at a later date. And if you want to deal with Diodora, just think carefully before taking any actions. If you mess up then it will only pull you in deeper shit," and walked out of the room with his group following behind him. Chapter 204, Diodora's Date. After Tatsuya and the others reached their home, all the girls immediately surrounded him and asked, "Why were you saying something like you don't care about the problem when not only you cursed most of his body, but also is stopping him from attempting to do the same to any more nuns? You could have killed him in an instant." Tatsuya looked at the group for a while and then moved past them and said, "Yeah, I have indeed keeping his actions in check so that no more girls get in trouble because of him, but the people back there also need to know that their factions are not as righteous as they think. I don't want them to do as their factions ask them to do without thinking about it. They will be used and tossed aside as pawns if their factions deem them useless. You all have already seen how Zenobia and Irina were sent here to deal with the Excalibur. They were ready to be thrown away if the mission was to get found out." All of them then became silent and just looked at Tatsuya, thinking about what he said. Tatsuya then took a seat and said, "Besides, I let him live was not because I don't care, but to make him take his action hastily and make more mistakes. Arrogant shits like him should be immensely pissed out by now, and he must have already started to take his actions." Meanwhile, in the underworld, Astaroth territory. In a room which was completely destroyed and had rubble all around it was a single person sitting in the center of the room. The said person stood up and gathered demonic energy in his hands and fired aimlessly. "That human needs to die. I will give him the most gruesome death there is. He will be begging for mercy from me. How dare he talk to me like that? And that bitch Asia, how dare he look at someone else other than me? I didn't allow her to do that. Looks like she needs to be punished. Yeah, that innocent lamb must be disciplined. She must know who is her master." He then made a magic circle and a projection of a man appeared in it. "What happened? Is something wrong at your end? Shalba, make the preparations faster. Someone is getting bold enough to report about my actions to that foolish Ajuka. If I get under suspicion, we will be having troubles in initiating the attack." Hearing that, the person who was in the projection frowned and said, "Who dares to cause interruptions in our plan? Is he strong?" Hearing that, Diodora snorted and said, "Strong my ass. It's just a weak human who is trying to bite more than he can chew." Shalba looked at Diodora with hesitation for a while, but nodded his head. He then thought, "It is not the time to doubt this brat's actions. If what he say really is true, then all our effort to attack will be lost." A few days have passed since Diodora came to Kuo, and since then he has been sending a letter daily for Asia, who simply burns them without even reading. "Asia, your stalker sent another one," called Himari. Asia came in the room while massaging her forehead and said, "That guy is really persistent now. I am beginning to regret declining Tatsuya-san's offer to get rid of him at that time." Tatsuya came in the room as well and said, "I told you," and shrugged his shoulders. Asia immediately hugged Tatsuya and said, "This is getting way too annoying, Tatsuya-san." Tatsuya just patted her head and caressed her blonde hair and said, "Then how about we go on a date this weekend to let you get refreshed a bit?" And immediately Asia perked up and kissed Tatsuya and said, "You are the best, Tatsuya-san." Tatsuya just pulled her cheeks and said, "So the frustration is already gone, huh?" "Taiyuan I hus," Asia said while her cheeks were being pulled. "Tatsuya-san, it hurts." Tatsuya let go of her cheeks, which were immediately clasped by Asia, who began rubbing them and said, "You are mean, Tatsuya-san." Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Thanks for the compliment." Himari then said, "If you two are done flirting, then what to do with this?" and showed the letter to the two of them. Asia immediately said, "Just burn it." But Tatsuya stopped her and said, Now don't be like that. He is sending his feelings to the person he loves." Tatsuya then took the letter in his hand and said, "It is unfortunate that he cannot get the girl he loves, but as the nice person I am, I will help him get the girl of his dreams." If anyone don't know who is he referring to as girl of his dreams, check out Say 71. Underworld. Astaroth territory. Diodora, who was lying in his renovated room, was giving off a malicious smile and was holding a letter in his hand. Hee. So you finally decided to show yourself to me, huh, Asia-chan? Hee. I want to see that human's face once he knows that Asia left her side. Hee. He then got off the bed and changed his clothes and got ready to be on his date. He immediately teleported back to Kuo and went to the house whose address was given to him in the letter. He came in front of the door, gave a final check to his appearance, and then rang the doorbell and held the bouquet in front of his hands. He then heard someone rushing towards the door and smirked, "Heh, so excited to see me, huh?" But when the door was opened, his whole body became stiff and the bouquet fell off his hands. The person who opened a door was a bulked-up man/woman. Pick whatever you want. Wearing a magical girl costume and was looking at Diodora. Oh my. Such an handsome man was the one who have been sending letters to this magical girl Miltan. Geez, how can refuse someone so passionate like you? Come inside. And grabbed the horror-struck boy and pulled him inside the house. The woman, probably, locked the door behind her and looked at Diodora with passionate eyes, making Diodora's mind scream in fear. He started backing away but soon came in front of a wall which blocked his path. He wanted to run away but immediately a hand slammed the wall next to his face, #Kabadan, which scared the shit out of him. The lady looked directly in Diodora's eyes and said, "You wrote your name was Diodora, right? Then I will call you Dora-chan, and you can call me Miltan." Diodora, who was scared as hell, tried to use his magic, but was not able to, #Wingman Tatsuya. Miltan then started to lean towards Diodora and whispered in his ears, "I will not let you sleep tonight." Diodora immediately shivered and thought, "I know I have not been able to sleep because of you for countless nights." He turned his head and wanted to tell her about the problem, but just as he opened his mouth, Miltan grabbed his face and said, "So you want to start from a kiss? Very well, magical girl Miltan will fulfill your wish." And then started to lean forward, after which the author fainted just from imaging anything further. Chapter 205. Kidnapped Asia. In front of an apartment from which the sound of someone fighting can be heard. The people who got close to the apartment immediately quickened their pace and rushed off from being anywhere near that apartment. But after a few hours of continuous fighting, the noise stopped and a few minutes later the door in front of the apartment opened and the figure of a young man with lifeless eyes was revealed with his clothes torn from various places, and needless to say the young man was none other than the lucky boy, Diodora, who just came out after spending the night of his life. Diodora then started walking away, though he was limping heavily. He just got to an abandoned alley without making any noise and made a magic circle and teleported back to Underworld. After a few days, the rumors about the Astaroth heir not coming out of the mansion for 5 days straight were heard and became the talk of his territory. A few days later, Asia, who had stopped receiving letters from her stalker, was humming happily while her arms were linked with Tatsuya's. Today is the weekend that Tatsuya promised her to take her on a date, so she was very happy as she was able to spend some time alone with him. Tatsuya, who looked at the blonde girl smiling innocently, just showed a small smile and said, "You know, I can walk on my own, and there is also no way that I will just leave you here." Asia just tightened her grip a bit more and said, "But isn't this fine as well? I like it more this way." Tatsuya just sighed and said, "Fine. So is there anything specific that you want to do?" Asia thought for a while and then shrugged her shoulder and said, "As long as we enjoy, then anything is fine." Tatsuya then said, "That sounds great." And then both of them just stopped at random stores that they found interesting, played some games at the arcade, and finally had their lunch in a nearby restaurant. As the sun started setting, Tatsuya and Asia came to a park and silently sat on the bench with their eyes closed. Both of them were just enjoying the peace, as the only sound which could be heard by them was that of water from the nearby fountain. Tatsuya then opened his eyes and said, "I just realized. This is the same park where Isami was killed by the fallen angel." Asia opened her eyes as well and said, "Here, huh? Well, I guess this must be it." The silence and lack of people here made it both a good date spot and a good murder spot as well. That fallen was using the date and kill tactics after all. Tatsuya looked at Asia and said, "Yeah, and one of them even tried to ask you out while we were on a date as well." Hearing that, Asia chuckled and said, "Yeah, her acting was good at start, and I totally thought that she was about to ask you out." Tatsuya then said, "But you were the one whom she had set her eyes on." Both of them then became silent for a while, but then Tatsuya said, "Hey, do you remember the first time we met, and how it all turned out with you coming with me?" Asia just nodded her head and looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya then said, "I won't say that I think what I did was wrong, but still I want to apologize for not taking care of the devil sooner. If I had did that, then you might have been still a number at the church, but I know that would not have been as exciting as being with us is, right?" Asia hugged Tatsuya and said, "Yeah, it wouldn't be fun at all, and I wouldn't even have any friends like I have now. So you don't have to apologize. Instead, let me thank you for being with me at those times. It was only because of you that I have a family now." Tatsuya hugged her back, and both of them then leaned forward and gave each other a kiss. Both of them soon serrated, and then Tatsuya said, "Want to go home?" Asia smirked and said, "Not today." Tatsuya chuckled and said, "Then a hotel is it? Let's get going," and stood up from the bench with Asia following him. But soon a green magic circle appeared under Asia's feet. Both her and Tatsuya looked at the magic circle for a while, and then said at the same time, "It's the stalker." Tatsuya then said, "Today must be his raiding game with the Grimory team." Tatsuya and Asia stared at each other for a while, and then Tatsuya asked, "Feeling angry?" To which Asia just showed a bright smile on her face. Tatsuya patted her head and said, "Then go and beat the shit out of him. I will come later as the victim whose girlfriend was kidnapped by some trash." Asia nodded and said, "I will make sure to pummel him so much that even shit would look better than him." With a bright smile, Tatsuya just sighed and said, "Well then, enjoy." Asia nodded, and then let the magic circle teleport her to Diodora's location. Tatsuya then sat back on the bench and said, let's wait for 5 minutes before going back to work. 5 minutes later, Tatsuya stood up from the bench, stretched his body, and then made a magic circle. He then took a deep breath and said, time for a dynamic entry, and then activated the magic circle and immediately teleported to the underworld. In the raiding game field where the match between the Astaroth and Grimoire were to take place was currently engulfed in a fight between the Chaos Brigade's True Satan faction and the New Satan faction. Suddenly a magic circle appeared in the middle of the field and a black-haired teen appeared from it and shouted, how dare you kidnap her, you bastards, and release a tremendous force which pushed back all the people fat away. Tatsuya looked around and saw that nobody he knew was near him, and the rest of them were either blown away or were unconscious because of the pressure he released. He gave an approving nod and said, yeah, my entry was great, totally nailed it. He then located where everyone was, and once he was done he teleported towards them. Chapter 206, Shinsha. After Tatsuya teleported to the location where he felt others, he was met with the sight of many devils firing at each other. He looked around while deflecting any attacks coming his way and soon noticed Azazel and Surzex. Yo, Azazel, Surzex having a party here, or what? Azazel and Surzex turned their heads towards the direction they heard the familiar voice from and said, oh, brat. Yeah, we are having a blast here. How come you are here as well? Did someone invite you? While both of them fired some blasts and spears to random devils. Tatsuya was slowly walking towards them, while he also blasted away some devils along the way and said, yeah, you see the host of the party was so kind that he kidnapped my girlfriend while we were on a date. Hearing that, both Surzex's and Azazel's eyes widened and both of them said at the same time, why the hell would we do something this foolish? Tatsuya nodded and fired a beam destroying dozens of devils in an instant and said, yeah, he was even stalking her for a while now. That guy is going to be fucked up by her. Azazel rubbed his chin and said, so which one did our host try to court? Asia. Both Surzex and Azazel immediately got silent, and then Azazel said, well, he is literally done for then. One less thing to take care of. Soon the Grimoire group came to ask for further instructions, and got surprised seeing Tatsuya was there as well. Tatsuya is here as well. Oni-sama, did you call him, or was it Azazel? Azazel smiled and said, Tatsuya is here invited by our host himself. You see, he wanted to show his bravery, and for it he kidnapped the blonde nun from his group, and that too when they were on a date. Hearing that, the whole Grimoire group got silent as well, and Kiba said, well, I pity him. Tatsuya then looked at Isami and said, anyway, forgetting about the people who are out to die soon. Isami, a surprise test for you. I want you to defeat at least 250 of them. Hearing that, Isami got surprised and said, hey, isn't 250 a bit too moo dash? Tatsuya interrupted her and said, if you are not able to do it, then I will make Tiamat train you the next time. Hearing that, Drake panicked and said, there is no way I am facing that crazy woman. Isami nodded her head furiously as well and said, I agree to that as well. Balance breaker. And got covered in a red armor and took off in the sky and started destroying the devils with her dragon slayer sword and magic. Soon the other members of the Grimoire group started attacking as well, while Citri group joined them soon as well. While this was going on, Azazel, Surzex and Tatsuya were just looking at how much each of them has progressed while also killing anyone brave enough to attack them. Tatsuya-chan. And Tatsuya immediately turned around and caught the Satan magical girl who jumped on him. Sarah-chan, nice to meet you. Seraphal hugged Tatsuya and said, did you come to see how this magical girl destroys everything with her magical glittering wand? And waved her wand from which actual sparkles came out. Tatsuya shook his head and said, Diodora kidnapped Asia on our date. So I am just playing the victim whose girlfriend was kidnapped. Seraphal got surprised as well and soon got serious and said, even a magical girl like me will not do that. Tatsuya just patted her head, making her transform back to her bubbly self and said, don't think too much. He is as good as dead anyways. Seraphal nodded and then joined the other three on seeing how much the young one have improved. Tatsuya looked at Isami and said, Isami, only 113 done yet? Pick up the pace. Isami, who just slashed a devil on the chest, shouted, I know. Drake, do your job if you don't want to face that fucking hag. The gauntlet started glowing, and continuous repeated shouts started to come out from it. Boost 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 boost. For our survival. Boost. Red aura started to come out of Isami as she instantly zipped through the devils, causing small explosion and killing them instantly. Hell yeah. I will survive this. After this will be a great fucking session with Tatsuya, and started burning the devils with her flames. Seraphal, who was standing beside Tatsuya, said in a low voice, I will have to make some plans as well. Tatsuya, who heard him, didn't say anything and just left her to her own ideas. If she wants to surprise him, then he doesn't want to ruin it. Soon all four of them felt two strong presences coming towards them and turned their heads. In front of them, two men, one with black hair and the other with brown, were standing while glaring at them, well, particularly at Surzex and Seraphal. Azazel rubbed his chin and said, a Beelzebub and an Asmodeus, huh, interesting. Both of them ignored Azazel and said, so two of the fake mouths are gathered together, huh? So should we show these fakes the power of the superior blood? If you both kneel and ask for apology, then we might just give you both a painless death. Tatsuya looked at Azazel, who looked back at him, and both of them said at the same time, "It's Shinshia shit time." Azazel rubbed his chin and said, "Looks like this venerable father should step back and give the young ones a chance to prove themselves." Tatsuya crossed his arms and said, "Then this young master will also observe how talented this young master's seniors are." Azazel nodded and said, "This venerable father also wants to see whether the sect leader Surzex is indeed a talent born in 10,000 years or not." Tatsuya had an amused expression on his face and said, "Heh, a talent born in 10,000 years. Then these insects who he is facing do not stand a chance." Seraphal also decided to play her part and said, "Then Sister Sarah will help martial brother Xiaozex to crush these insects." She then whispered in a low voice, "Surzex-chan, use a punch with enough force to either knock him out or make him spit blood." Surzex's brows twitched and he said, "You three, we are not here to play. We should take them Sari dash." Tatsuya then said, "I heard that outer disciple Rias likes this kind of stuff." And Surzex immediately said, "Let this venerable immortal show you puny insects your place. After which I will make Rir my martial sister." And immediately Lon head towards the two devils who got in their stance as well, but Surzex didn't flinch and just punched the black-haired Asmodeus in the gut, which made him cough out a large amount of blood. Azazel smirked and said, "Looks like this venerable one did not make a mistake." Tatsuya nodded as well and said, "As expected of sect leader Xiaozex." Seraphal puffed her chest, "Heh, martial brother is very strong. He is not called a talent born in 10,000 years for nothing." The black and the brown-haired devils glared at the four people in front of them and were clearly showing their anger for being looked down on upon by them. Shalba gritted his teeth and randomly fired a lot of blasts of demonic energy towards them. The four of them simply dodged or deflected the blasts coming towards them. While they were dodging, Surzex asked, "Can't this be stopped between us? We can work together to achieve peace and avoid all the deaths which have been caused by these wars." The black-haired one snorted and said, "Peace, alliance, and all these things are bullshit. Any race other than us devils should just perish." Tatsuya snorted and said, "And that is why you will not be able to join our men of culture sect. Things like race don't bother us at all." Azazel nodded and said, "This venerable one agrees as well." Both the devils just got more and more irritated by Tatsuya's and Azazel's rambling, and then started to fire their attacks without even thinking, which made it even more easier for the four to deal with them. But then Surzex's and Seraphal's Siscon sense started ringing bell in their head, and both of them noticed some of their attacks going towards Rias and Sona. Both of them immediately teleported in front of their sister to shield them from the attacks, but Tatsuya appeared in front of the two and fired a beam, destroying all the demonic energy orbs. Tatsuya then said, "I didn't know you all were so low to attack their sisters to gain advantage. Yeah, how dare you attack my dear So/Riatan? Are you both tired of living?" Azazel chuckled and said, "Now you two are goners. Let this venerable one tell you who you are up against. The three in front of you are the elders of Siscon sect. You both are done for." Tatsuya looked at Azazel and said, "We are done with Shinshia, so you can stop." Azazel looked a bit disappointed and said, "Already, sigh whatever. Oi devils from the old Satan faction. Let me tell you this, the moment your attacks decided to touch their sisters, you were some four. You both have my condolences. Now then, Siscon's attack." Chapter 207, ROB. Currently, while Tatsuya and the others were fighting the two old Maos, at another location in the underworld where the whole place was on the verge of breaking down, a black-haired teen was hiding behind some pieces of rubble while a blonde-haired girl was happily looking around, probably searching for him with a smile on her face. Asia, who had a cheerful smile on her face, looked around and said, "Hey, piece of shit. Be grateful I'm not using any sensing abilities to find you. But aren't you getting a bit ungrateful by hiding at a difficult place? Bad bastard." A cheerful smile then appeared on her face and she said, "Well, this is fine as well. The more time I will take to find you, the harder I will beat the shit out of you." The black-haired boy who was hiding was none other than Diodora Astaroth, who was also the one who kidnapped the girl. But currently, instead of having a smug look on his face, he was just shivering with fear while crouching down and holding his knees. His body was also covered with blood and bruises, which was making it harder to recognize him. Come out wherever you are. Didn't you say that you wanted to play with me? Are you having fun playing this game dash?" She then vanished from her spot and appeared near some rubble where Diodora was whispered in his ear, "Diodora-san." The boy immediately flinched as fear spread through his body, but before he could do anything, a fist connected to his face, sending him flying a few hundred meters away, crashing through multiple boulders and flying right through them. Diodora groaned in pain and opened his eyes only to see the blonde nun who he wanted to torture, just right above him, flying with a bright smile on her face. But seeing her smile, instead of feeling safe, happy, or wanting to protect that smile, he felt scared. His whole body tensed up and he just wanted to run away from her as far as possible. The nun then cracked her knuckles and said, "Pummeling time," and punched the boy in the gut, making him immediately crash on the ground as he spit out a large amount of blood. The boy's eyes were becoming hazy as he thought that he was nearing death. His consciousness was slowly fading away, but instead of despair, he was feeling happy and a bit excited as well. He could finally escape the hands of this blonde nun who was beating the hell out of him. Is this how I die? But I don't feel bad about it. Though I wanted to accomplish a lot more things, mostly breaking more nuns, but I don't think I would probably do it again. The experience I had with Asia is something I don't want to go through again. Sigh, if somehow I were to be reborn again, then I want to live a peaceful life, not involving any devil politics, thirst for power, and most importantly, the thirst of women. I don't want any of that. I just want a calm life now. Suddenly, a blinding light enveloped his consciousness, and soon, when it started to die down, a humanoid figure made of the same white light appeared. Seeing him, Diodora was shocked and thought, is this one of those isekai things? Am I going to actually have a second chance at life? Yeah. Now let's think about my wish dash. But suddenly the glowing man raised his hands and said, Whoa, stop dude, stop. Diodora looked at the glowing entity and said, Oh, introductions are in order, but you must already be knowing me, but still, I am Diodora Astaroth, and you must be an ROB. Now onto the isekai part. UCI dash. The glowing entity raised his hand, making Diodora stop rambling, and then said, Dude, just hear me out. Diodora then asked, What are you not, ROB? The glowing entity crossed his hands and said, Of course I am a ROB, but UC dash. Diodora then said, Then it must be my time to reincarnate in another world, right? The glowing entity immediately said, Nah. What do you mean it is not? Oh, the blondie still has to beat the shit out of you. Why, I just came to laugh at you. And immediately Diodora's surrounding changed and he opened his eyes only to see the blonde-haired nun firing a green energy wave at him. Oh, you are awake? Don't worry, I still want to play a bit more, so I healed you. Aren't I nice? I did just like how I saved you back then. Diodora, who heard her, shouted, Oh. Asia smirked and said, Why yes. Diodora looked at the blonde-haired girl in front of him and thought, I am going to die anyway. At least let me tell you readers what happened to me before we started to play hide and seek. You see dash. All Might, not so fast. Diodora? All Might, you dare to break the fourth wall. I cannot let this crime go unseen. But author Shounen, don't worry. You ask why? It's because I am here. Cliff, hanger. Smash. Chapter 208, Pain. After Tatsuya and the others were done with the two old satans, they looked at each other and Tatsuya asked, You all should be able to deal with the rest of them, right? Surzax and Azazel nodded and said, Yeah. Odin should be coming in a moment or two as well. Tatsuya nodded and said, Well, I am going to see how much destruction Asia caused. See you later. And then started walking towards the direction he felt Asia's presence from. The Gremory group and Citri group also decided to follow him as their older siblings have told them that they can take care of the situation. Isami, though, was resting on Tatsuya's back as she has overused her powers and was suffering from a serious body ache. You can heal me, right, Tatsuya? Yeah, I can. Then why not do it and let your girlfriend out of this pain? Because only if one experienced true pain, then only they can know what true peace is. #Nagato. Just sit back and enjoy the piggyback ride. Isami continued to pester him for a while, but seeing that wasn't going to heal her, she stopped and just rested on his back. Tatsuya, who noticed that, said, If you would have fought more efficiently and looked after how much your body could withstand, then you won't be in this condition. Let this be the punishment for you not understanding it. Hey, it was Drake who powered me up. Isn't it his fault? A red gauntlet then appeared on her hand and said, Don't blame me. A sacred gear only answers to the user's wish. It is completely your fault, plus the fact that I don't want to face that crazy woman. See, isn't it his fault for shitting himself because of Tiamat? Whatever, you are not receiving any treatment. Just bear with pain, because sometimes you must hurt in order to know, fall in order to grow, lose in order to gain, because life's greatest lessons are learned through pain. Isami and the others remained silent for a while, and then Isami said, Where the hell are these quotes coming from? Tatsuya ignored her and just continued to walk towards Asia's direction. Once he was close to the location, he stopped and gave Isami's body to Kaneko and said, Just wait here for a while. I will go first and check how the situation there is. It might be a little too much for some of you. Rias then looked a bit hurt and said, Come on, it cannot be something that be dash. It's Asia who have been interrupted on her date, and that too before we were going to the hotel. Hearing that, all of them fell silent and tried to imagine what could have happened and just shuddered at the thought. Tatsuya then just waved his hand and walked towards the building, which were now nothing more than ruins. Once Tatsuya entered the ruins, he felt some noises and started following it, and soon encountered Asia playing volleyball with Diodora, where Diodora was used as the ball while a clone was on the receiving end. I want to smash, all right, here. The clone then launched the ball, Diodora, up in the air as a loud scream came out of Diodora's mouth. Asia then jumped and covered her hand with ki and smashed her fist in his gut, making him spit out some of the blood which was left in his body, and then immediately he was blown away and crashed in the ground, making a crater similar to the ones which were present all around the ground. Tatsuya then looked at Asia and saw her covered in blood and dust with a cheerful smile on her face. Asia looked at her clone and said, One more time. Looks like you are enjoying a lot. Asia, who recognized the voice, turned around and saw Tatsuya coming towards her. She just nodded her head and said with her usual bright smile, Yeah, I beat the hell out of him, made his spill his guys out, healed him, and then again repeated with beating the hell out of him. Tatsuya then looked at Diodora, who was hardly recognizable, and walked towards him and asked, Yo, had your fun playing around with my girlfriend? Diodora looked towards Tatsuya, pitifully asking for help, but Tatsuya just smiled and said, Oh, I didn't come to help you. I just came to laugh at you. Hearing that, Diodora's eyes widened and he thought, So it was you. Tatsuya then telepathically told him, You thought it was ROB, but it was I, Tatsuya. Tatsuya then took out his gun and said, well, it was not nice to meet you, goodbye. Diodora looked at the gun in his hand and said, but I had Ophus's power. Tatsuya looked at him with a look which said, really, and told him, dude, I literally fuck Ophus. And pulled the trigger, and immediately Diodora's body glow disappeared, leaving behind a white mist which dissipated soon as well. Tatsuya then looked at Asia and cleaned her clothes and body and said, let's get going then. But soon a portal appeared in front of him, and out of it Valley, Biko, Arthur, and Ophus came out and were surprised to see Tatsuya there. Tatsuya raised his hand and said, yo, long time no see. Biko raised his hand as well and said, yo, yeah, it's been a while, but how come you were here as well? Tatsuya pointed at Asia and said, Diodora tried to kidnap her, and the rest is history. Hearing that, all of them widened their eyes except for Ophus, who just walked near Asia and checked her body for any injuries. After a while, Biko broke out laughing while Valley and Arthur just face-palmed at the devil's foolishness. Tatsuya looked at Valley and asked, so why are you here? Valley looked at Tatsuya and said, oh, I just came to see how good Shalba is. So, where is he? Dead. Surzex took care of him and the Asmodeus. Valley just yawned and said, oh, then nothing much to do here. How is the red dragon, by the way? Oh, she is progressing steadily. Might be possible that she can beat you, considering that her Dragon Slayer powers have become more efficient to use. Hearing that, Valley got excited and immediately wanted to challenge his rival, but Tatsuya told him that right now she was completely exhausted from her battle and will have to rest for a while. Valley and the other two talked with Tatsuya for a while, and then decided to go back to their base. Tatsuya then looked towards Asia, and as that she was talking with Ophus and asked, do you not have to go back? To which Ophus just shook her head and said, nothing important to do right now, so I will be staying with you for a while. Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, let's get going then, and then walked out of the ruins and met up with the others. Chapter 209. Loki once again. While all three of them were walking towards the group of devils, Tatsuya suppressed Ophus's aura to the point that it would only read to be that of a dragon instead of a dragon god. Ophus, who noticed the change in her, looked towards Tatsuya, who patted her head and said, you know what to say when someone asks you who you are, right? Ophus nodded her head, said, I am Tiamat's friend and Ria's cousin. Tatsuya nodded, and then continued to walk. Once the devils noticed Tatsuya coming back with Asia and Ophus, they felt relieved on seeing Asia and confused on seeing Ophus, except for Kaneko and a certain dragon in the gauntlet. Though Drake could not feel her infinity aura, his instinct as a dragon immediately told him who the young girl was, and since he had felt a similar fear before he came to know who the girl was, Drake was going to ask about what was happening, but Tatsuya immediately telepathically told him, open your mouth and the whole world will come to know about the dragon of domination wanting to dominate the dragon of supremacy. Drake closed his mouth and said, I don't know what you might be talking about. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, looks like you are quite understanding. He then introduced Ophus to the others, saying that she came to see Asia and check if there was some problem or not. He then teleported back with the other two, along with Isami, tagging along with him, as she was not in a condition to move. Once they reached back to Kuo, Tatsuya looked at Asia and said, let's continue the hotel plan sometime later. Asia, who heard that, pouted in disappointment, but soon calmed down and agreed to his proposal. All four of them then entered Tatsuya's house with Isami resting over Tatsuya's back. Once they all were inside, the older residents of the Shiba house were surprised on noticing both of them. It was too early for their hotel date and too late for a non-hotel date. All of them came out to know what was the matter and were surprised seeing Ophus and Isami along with them. Tatsuya asked Asia to fill them in on the matter while he will go and put Isami in a bed. Once he did so, he was about to leave the room, but a gauntlet manifested in Isami's hand and Drake asked, will you explain it to us later? Tatsuya looked at the gauntlet and said, rest for now. Isami is already tired a lot. I will fill you in on the matter in the morning, and then left the room. Once he came down, he saw the girls laughing at what Diodora did and how she played with him. Rosweiss was a bit conflicted whether to laugh or not about the matter, but just let it out off her mind. She then noticed the small girl sitting in Tatsuya's lap and eating a cake and asked, who is the kid? Tatsuya patted Ophus's head and said, oh, you are new here. She is Ophus. Ophus, she is Rosweiss, my secretary. Be nice to her. Ophus looked at the silver-haired girl with her emotionless expression and said, don't take my sweets if you are not tired of living, and continued eating her cake. Rosweiss, who received a sudden threat, was surprised but didn't press on the matter for long. Rather, she was thinking that she had heard her name before and started thinking where she had heard it. Soon her face paled and she pointed her shaking finger towards Ophus and asked, Ophus, you don't mean that, Ophus, right? Tatsuya looked at her and only smiled in response, making Rosweiss' whole body stiff. Seeing her like that, Ria said, what are you acting so scared for? You spent the whole vacation with me and Tiamat. Ah, and if you cannot tell, I am Great Red. Nice to meet you. And once again Rosweiss got shocked and slowly turned her head to look at the other two dragons in the room, which only increased her tension. Tatsuya looked at her and said, don't think too much. The only thing that you need to know is that if word of Ophus and Great Red leaves your mouth and someone other than the ones whom I have told of about them comes to know, and I find that it was you, then, oh Rosweiss, why not have a drink? And gave her a bottle. Rosweiss looked at her boss and said in teary voice, Hey, how can you change the topic all of a sudden? And what was that threat for? I need a drink, and took the bottle and glass from Tatsuya's hands. Tatsuya then said, pour some for me as well. Here. Clank, cheers. Tatsuya and Rosweiss kept on drinking for a while until suddenly Tatsuya's gaze fell on the three pups and he realized something. Oh, shit, I forgot about my catch. He then took out a master ball and brought Loki out. Loki, who came out off the ball, looked around his surroundings and was confused for a while, but then his gaze fell on Tatsuya and immediately a frown appeared on his face. He wanted to attack him, but for some reason he was not able to use his powers. Tatsuya then said, "If you are done mentally cursing me, then why not have a seat, and let's talk about what you will do next along with a drink." Loki was immediately going to refuse him, but then the tree pups whom he immediately recognized told him that it was fine, and that Tatsuya wasn't an enemy. Tatsuya then stood up from his seat and sat beside Rosweiss, who even though was wasted because of alcohol, laid in his lap along with the puppies who jumped in his lap as well. Loki was surprised seeing his son and grandsons acting so fondly towards the human, and also the silver-headed secretary of his father who was infamous for being single acting like that towards the human. Tatsuya then gave him a glass of wine and said, "Well, I don't think that I need to tell you what kind of situation you are in, right?" Loki checked whether there was something present in the drink or not by asking Fenrir, who after sniffing it told him that the drink was completely fine. Loki then took a sip and was a bit surprised noticing that it was better than what he used to drink back in Asgard. He then looked at Tatsuya and said, "You mean by the fact that currently a god like myself is under you as a slave?" "Yeah, I already know about it." Tatsuya smirked and said, "Hurts your pride quite a bit, right?" Hearing that, Loki frowned but still nodded his head. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Well, I am not going to bullshit like some devil peerage kings about how this is not slavery or something else. I will just say that your situation currently is like a prisoner of war, though the prisoner is sent to another place to being looked after. And whatever you may say, you still have to agree to the fact that if you were to go back to Asgard or Hades to either of three factions, you would either be killed or sealed." Loki stared at Tatsuya for a while, trying to assess how this human was, and nodded his head. Tatsuya then took out a paper and said, "Well, since you are currently my responsibility, I will have to take care of you, but you still have to earn your keep. So here," and passed the paler on to the god. Loki took the paper and Tatsuya said, "Choose whatever job you want to do, and make sure to choose something that you are able to do at least." Loki looked at paper and saw various job offers listed on it with the conditions and salary. He got infuriated seeing that the human was asking a god like him to do these lowly things and slammed his fists on the table. Tatsuya, who was still calm, patted the troubled Rosweiss, who was squirming in his lap as she got surprised by the noise. "How dare you ask a god like me to do something like this? Do you really think that I am going to do these things? Well, if you don't want to starve, wear the same clothes without even taking a bath for weeks, then yes, you will do those things because your abilities are sealed so you won't be able to cause any troubles. And just the fact even these pups are earning their keep by working." To which the pups sat up and puffed their chest with pride, seeing which Tatsuya patted them while Loki's lips were twitching. Loki then continued to argue with Tatsuya for a while, still not willing to abide by his rules and being prideful. Tatsuya also didn't press him too much. He knew that he is still a god and has the pride and power of one as well. It will take some time till he will calm himself down and come to think about things realistically. He looked at Loki and said, "Well, then I will call you again tomorrow. So if you have a change of heart, then you can tell me later. Oh, and here," and threw a bottle of water and bread towards him. Loki caught them and was then once again called back to his cell. Master Ball. Seeing him vanish away, the pups felt a bit sad. He was still their father/grandfather who have raised him, and seeing his situation while they can't do anything about it made the sad. Tatsuya then comforted the pups and said that Loki would understand soon and will be back with them. The pups just nodded their head, hoping that what their new master told him was true. Meanwhile, inside the pokeball, Loki, who was lying on the something like a clod whose ends were nowhere to be inside, and said, "That alcohol was really good. Not to mention what he told about me being killed or sealed was true as well, but what I cannot understand is dash." He then took out the paper with job offers and said, "How come there is a job of working in a cross-dressing bar as a pole dancer at that with the highest pay among all of these jobs?" He then once again went through all the jobs written on the paper and then kept it back and went asleep. Chapter 210, Going to Kyoto. A few weeks passed and Loki's pride finally went down a notch and he decided to start working as well. He decided to work under Tatsuya as a sous chef of one of the chains of his restaurant in the same town. Tatsuya didn't have any idea that Loki was good at cooking and was surprised when Loki was able to keep up with him in the kitchen. Seeing that, Tatsuya decided to teach him some of his own skills and then make him an instructor for the new people who will work under him later. He also sent 2 of the pups with him for protection, as the current Loki was not able to use his powers and at best could take on peak big class level beings. Odin, Thor, Hela and Freya even came to see Loki working once Tatsuya told them about it, upon seeing which all of them teased Loki a lot, much as his annoyance. "Boss, it is the end of the month. Oh, here your paycheck, right?" "Yup." Currently Tatsuya and the other residents of the Shiba house, which now includes Loki and the pups as well, were playing cards, and currently Fenrir was the one who was winning. "Hey, then what about mine? How can you forget about this god?" "Hati, I saw that. Don't cheat. You have just started working and you want a paycheck. At least have some dignity. You are still a god, though a powerless one. But you do have some talent in cooking, Loki-san. To be able to keep up with Oni-sama is no small feat. Heh, nothing is impossible for a god like me, much less keeping up with a human. Whatever. Oh, Loki-san, Skull is peeking. You little shit of a grandson. Stop cheating. Arf arf." What do you mean by I am in no position to say something like that? Arfarf. Huh, I was the god of trickery. So what? Trickery and cheating are different. And HATI stop cheating. Arfarf. By no means what you are doing is trickery, that's pure cheating. Arfarf. How dare you swear at your grandfather? Ah, Finra-chan won again. Arfarfarf. Well, I will win the next one. Himari is going to lose again. Huh, what do you mean by that, ice bitch? Are you so incompetent that you cannot understand it, you idiot? Both of them then started releasing their aura, and the room started to get hotter and colder at the same time. Tatsuya then gave a hand chop on their heads and said, no fighting inside the house. Ugh, that hurts, Oni-sama. And Miyuki received another hand chop, and Tatsuya said, and what's with that tone? Miyuki then groaned, but Tatsuya ignored her and said, oh, school trip for the second years is approaching as well. Hearing that, both the second and the first years perked up and looked at Tatsuya. The second years with excitement and the first years with annoyance. Tatsuya then said, Rosswise, pack your stuff, we will be leaving for Kyoto in a day or two. Hearing that, all the girls were surprised, and Himari asked, wait a minute, there is still week before the trip, right? Tatsuya nodded and said, yeah, but Serafal said that she was going to Kyoto to make an alliance with the Yukai and Shinto faction and asked me to come along with her so that she can enjoy a bit. But since I am going there, I was thinking of taking Rosswise with me so that she can help Shuri and teach her some of her tricks. So I will meet you all directly at Kyoto Station. Hearing that, the second years were a bit sad but still felt happy that he would still be there on the trip. Rosswise, who was just told that she would be going as well, got surprised and immediately got sober and asked, but is it fine for me to go with you? Tatsuya nodded and smiled and said, yeah, it would be fine. I have no problems with it. Plus you are my secretary, so you will have look after the work, and also I cannot think of anyone better you for the job, and Shuri's work efficiency is decreasing as well. She can get help from pros as well. Hearing that, Rosswise got serious and nodded her head. Her boss was trusting her with this opportunity, so she cannot let his expectations down, plus she could enjoy the trip there as well. A few days later, in front of the Shiba residence, a Serafal, who was not wearing her magical girl costume, but instead casual clothes, was standing along with Tatsuya and Rosswise. Tatsuya looked at Serafal and said, we can just teleport there. Serafal pouted and said, but that would not be fun. Let's go buy a car instead. Besides, the sooner we go, the sooner I would have to start working. Tatsuya sighed and looked at Kurumi and was about to say something, but she raised her hand and said, I am company ing as well, so choose some else is in charge. And went inside Tatsuya's body. Tatsuya blinked in surprise for a while and looked towards Shizuka and said, you are the in charge. Make sure they don't go overboard and destroy the country while playing. Also call me immediately if something goes wrong. All of them nodded and hugged Tatsuya, and then Tatsuya summoned a car and turned back to his adult form and said, let's get going, you two. And Sarah, you will be in the middle seat. Hey, you cannot do that. Of course I can. I will be the one who is driving, and since I am on a vacation, then that means no power usage, just simple human things, unless it become necessary, which somehow will occur, and I don't want to kill someone who decides to have an accident with us. And I can definitely say that you will not stay calm and will disturb my driving. Serafal pouted and then tried to use puppy eyes, but Tatsuya just pinched her cheeks and pulled her and made her sit in the middle seat. He then sat on the driver's seat, and finally Rosswise sat in the front seat, and then Tatsuya left for Kyoto. On the way, just as Tatsuya predicted, Serafal went all bubbly and excited, looking here and there, and talking with the other two with her giving them much space for the argument, and soon got tired from both the excitement and the mal work that she had been doing for the past few weeks and went asleep. Originally there was still a week, till Serafal had to go to Kyoto. But in order to set up a trip with Tatsuya, she worked herself to the bone to complete her work, which made all the people, even the Maos and her family, completely shocked. They had never seen Serafal working this diligently, and it was a total surprise for them to see the bubbly Mao like that. Rosswise just looked at the Mao, who was sleeping peaceful with drool coming out of her mouth. She just gave a wry smile and then looked away. Seeing someone who can level countries with ease with an expression like that was just something unexpected for her. Now that I think about strong. She then looked at Tatsuya, who was driving with a small smile on his face, and soon a blush appeared on her cheeks. She then thought, isn't it just like we are on a drive date? And she immediately averted her eyes from him but still looked at him from time to time. For someone who had been longing to get in a relationship, it was one of her dreams to go on a driving date with a guy. And since Tatsuya was currently in his adult form and was looking more mature, and both of them being in the front together within the silence in the car just made the atmosphere feel like that of a date to her. She then covered her cheeks with her hands and shook her thoughts away. Calm down, Rosswise. He is your boss. Don't think about such things. But wait a minute. What is the problem with us being boss and secretary? There are no prohibitions in a relationship like that, and it is not like a forbidden relationship as well. Plus, even though he is still a high schooler, age-wise we are still around the same age. So, just what the hell are you thinking? Get your mind off the gutter. Tatsuya, who noticed Rosswise squirming in her seat, looked at her and asked, is something wrong with you, Ross? And immediately Rosswise looked at Tatsuya and said, no problem at all. Tatsuya looked at her for a while and then gave her a bottle of water and said, anyway, this might help you calm down a bit. And don't hold back. If something is wrong, just tell me about it. You are the part of the family now, Ross. Rosswise took the bottle from his hands and nodded her head, but then she realized something and thought, did he just call me by a nickname? And immediately gulped down the whole bottle of water. Tatsuya, who was not using any of his powers right now as he didn't want to use them on the trip, didn't know that currently Rosweiss' imagination was going wild and just focused on driving. Chapter 211, Shuri's Gift. After Tatsuya and the others reached Kyoto, he dropped Serafall at the hotel which was under her family so that she can do some work before meeting the Yukai. She wanted Tatsuya to stay with her as well but was denied as Tatsuya had to check on his subordinates and branches in Kyoto as well. Tatsuya and Rosweiss soon reached their destination and got off the car. Rosweiss was finally able to calm herself down and was now back to her secretary mode. Both of them then entered a building, and as soon as the receptionist saw them her eyes widened, and she immediately bowed her head. "Greetings, sir. It is a pleasure for us to have you here. Do you want us to inform the manager?" Tatsuya shook his hands and said, "No need for that. A surprise would be better than her being informed about us." Hearing that, the receptionist's lips twitched and she thought, Shuri-san is done for. The receptionist then personally led them to the manager's office, and once they were in front of the room, Tatsuya asked her to go back. Once she was gone, Tatsuya looked at Rosweiss and said, "Don't make a noise." Rosweiss nodded and said, "I-und-dash," but Tatsuya immediately covered her mouth with his hands, while placed his own finger on his lips, gesturing her to remain silent. Rosweiss, whose mouth was being held by Tatsuya, was not able to think properly and just stayed quiet while her imagination once again started running wild. What is he going to do to me? He first led me to a room, then sent the other person away, asked me to keep quiet, and is now covering my mouth so that no voice leaks from my mouth. It's definitely one of those tropes I once saw in an AD*LT video. Tatsuya then pulled her body closer, making her blush getting deeper, and then silently phased through the door, along with Rosweiss. Once both of them were inside, Tatsuya left Rosweiss and crept closer to the person who was sitting on the chair facing the other way. So a new item came, huh? A whip modified to give electric shocks as well. Definitely gonna buy it. A new gag as well. Oh, so many new toys to play with. Tatsuya then said, "You seem to be enjoying yourself?" "Yeah, today came the new catalog and dash." Suddenly she stopped and turned around and saw Tatsuya looking at her with a smile on her face. "Looks like you're working nicely, seeing that you have the time to look at the new toys catalog at work." Shuri started sweating when she saw her boss's smile and didn't know what to do. "So how is the work coming along?" Shuri immediately stood up and took out some files from a bundle and gave it to Tatsuya. "Here, sir." Tatsuya took a file and gave it to Rosweiss, who immediately took it and started going through them. Tatsuya then took his and started going through it as well. Shuri, who saw Tatsuya and the silver-haired woman who she didn't know going through the files, immediately hid her catalog and asked someone to bring tea and snacks quickly. A few moments later, once both Tatsuya and Rosweiss went through the files, Tatsuya looked at Rosweiss, who shook her head. Tatsuya looked at Shuri, who flinched at his gaze. Tatsuya then said, "Lucky, she had all the files done this time around. I was totally in the mood of seeing my mother-in-law making excuses to not fire her." And then clicked his tongue. Hearing that, Shuri sighed while Rosweiss chuckled. Shuri then looked at Tatsuya with a smile on her face and said, "Sorry to disappoint you, boss. I have been working diligently for a while, but you know dash." Before she could continue, Tatsuya said, "You are not getting a raise." Hearing that, Shuri flinched and then said, as perceptive as ever, "Just raise it a bit. I have to buy some toys. That man of torture is earning as well. He is more than sufficient to buy the stuff that he likes." Shuri then clicked her tongue and then took her seat as well and asked, "So why are you here? Don't tell me that you came here to just meet your beautiful mother-in-law." Hearing that, Rosweiss looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Akino-san?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yeah, she is Akino's mother. Shuri, this is Rosweiss, my secretary." Rosweiss bowed her head and said, "Nice to meet you. I am Rosweiss, a former Valkyrie from Valhalla." Shuri bowed her head as well and said, "Shuri Himejima, former member of the Himejima clan. By the way, are you AS or AM?" Rosweiss' lips twitched and Tatsuya said, "Ignore her antics, by the way. How has the things going on the supernatural side of Kyoto?" Shuri looked at Tatsuya and said, "Nothing much is happening here, not much of open problems, though the ones in secret are not in my knowledge." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, whatever, we came here along with Sarah. She has some peace talk to do Yukai and Shinto faction. I am on a vacation for the week, after which I would have my school trip." Shuri widened her eyes and asked, "Peace talk? Are they making an alliance? Which side are we on?" Tatsuya laid back comfortably and said, "None. We are staying neutral. It's better to stay out of the ways of those old and prideful factions." "Oh, but your daughter and husband are a part of the alliance." Shuri nodded and then asked Rosweiss, "So are you the secretary, huh? How much is he paying you and making you work?" Rosweiss and Shuri then started talking with each other as both of them felt a connection between them. Their boss used to work them to the bone. Tatsuya for Shuri and Odin for Rosweiss. Tatsuya then left them on their own and said, "I will be in my room. Ask someone to give me the keys of my suite." Shuri then took out a card from her pocket and said, "Already did. Here," and threw it towards Tatsuya, who caught the key and went to the suite which only belonged to him. Later that evening, Tatsuya talked to Serafall, and both of them decided to visit the Yukai faction the next day, as Serafall wanted to rest a bit longer. Tatsuya then decided to take a bath and went in the bathroom. Once he was done, he came out only wearing shorts and lied down on the bed to sleep. Rosweiss, who got her key from Shuri, decided to rest as well. She really liked talking to Shuri and exchanged contacts with her to talk to her once she went back with Tatsuya. It was very rare for her to find someone who was able to understand her situation, and since talking to her was enjoyable, she decided that they could be good friends. She entered the room and switched on the lights and went inside, but once she got in, she was completely shocked. In front of Rosweiss, Tatsuya was lying on the bed wearing nothing but shorts. Seeing that, a blush immediately appeared on her face, and she didn't know what to do in such a situation. Suddenly, she received a message on her phone and immediately took it out so as to distract her mind. Messages. Shuri Himejima. So how is my gift, Rosjan? Great, right? No need to thank me. Just think of it as a gift for our friendship and enjoy to your heart's content. Winking face, winking face, winking face. P.S. The room is completely soundproof. You can scream as loud as you want. Rosweiss immediately put her phone back and covered her cheeks and thought, what the hell do you mean by enjoy to your heart's content? My heart is going to come out of my chest in this kind of situation. She then looked at the sleeping Tatsuya and stared at his face for a while. Handsome, right? Out of nowhere, she heard a voice and jumped back in surprise. She then looked at Tatsuya and then noticed a body started to manifest near him, and soon Kurumi came in her sight. Seeing her, Rosweiss sighed and said, don't scare me like that, Kurumi-san. Kurumi chuckled and said, oh, don't mind me, it's just a bad habit of mine. By the way, why are you here, planning to attack him while he is asleep? You are sly one. Well, I will join you to keep you company. Hearing that, Rosweiss immediately shook her head and started explaining what happened. After hearing that, she immediately placed a sound barrier around Tatsuya and started laughing loudly, making Rosweiss more embarrassed. Once she was done, she looked at Rosweiss and said, so what will you do now? You can attack if you want to. But Rosweiss immediately rejected. Hearing that, Kurumi smirked and said, well, aren't you good-natured? If any of the other girls from back home were to see him like this, they would at the very least take the opportunity to snuggle up to him. Kurumi sighed and said, well, I guess he would be happy about this as well. His fatigue has really taken a toll on his body. So letting him rest is a good idea. Hearing that, Rosweiss asked, what does he do aside from going to school that he is tired? Hearing that, Kurumi gave a wry smile and said, well, from the point of view of all of you, you may not know, but for someone like me who is a part of him and occasionally go and reside inside him, know how much he is working. Though not physically, there are more than 1,000 clones that are working for him, and each day after they disperse the amount of info from all of them. Let's just say it is not comparable to anything I have seen. And he is doing that every day, so it is natural that he is tired. Hearing that, Rosweiss' eyes widened and she asked, seriously, how much mental resistance does he have? Kurumi snickered and said, comparable to Ruya, and it is only because of it that he can withstand all this. Not even all the members of the group combined can take in and process that much information on a whole day, much less an instant like he does. Compared to us, his work is way too much. There are many clones who are maintaining the balance between various races so that conflict do not arise between them. Rosweiss was totally surprised hearing about the things that her boss is doing. She cannot believe what Kurumi was saying was the truth, but still the tone of her voice and the look in her eyes made her feel that the woman in front of her was indeed telling the truth. Suddenly she realized something and asked, wait a minute, you are saying that he is maintaining peace between various factions around the globe? Hearing that, Kurumi smirked and said, I don't have the exact details, as even I don't have the complete authority to look over his memories, but I can still tell that he have gained enough favors and acquaintances that he can make at least an average-sized faction if ever needs. Rosweiss, who had her fair share of reactions today, just accepted the fact that her boss was awesome and didn't question him. She then looked at Tatsuya and then asked, by the way, where would I be sleeping? Kurumi snorted and said, just get on the bed. I can guarantee that he wouldn't do anything. I hardly believe that you are willing to sleep on the floor when this comfortable thing is right here. And then pushed the mattress a bit, which immediately engulfed her hand, showing how soft it was. Rosweiss then thought for a while, and then lied in the bed as well, though she made a wall of pillows between the two of them. Kurumi also lied beside Tatsuya and then asked, don't tell the others about what we just talked about. He don't want them to worry about him. Rosweiss just nodded, and then slowly drifted off to sleep. Chapter 212. Is he a pedophile? The next morning when Tatsuya woke up, he turned around to get some more sleep, but immediately crashed into something soft. He then moved his hands to check what it was, and after giving it a squish or two, he thought, Kurumi, huh? He then turned the other side, and once again the same thing happened, but this time he was confused. Who else had the guts to come into his room and sleep beside him? He opened his eyes and saw his silver-haired secretary sleeping peacefully next to him. He then looked at both the girls who were sandwiching him and muttered, so that's why I felt a bit stuffy while sleeping. Tatsuya then scratched his head and said, well, whatever. Let's wake these two up. It's already getting late. We have to meet Yasaka as well. He then shook their bodies lightly, making the two girls squirm a bit as he smiled, seeing them frowning in annoyance. But suddenly he felt something and immediately turned towards Kurumi and started shaking her more violently. Kurumi, wake up. Hurry up. You need to tell me, how did it happen? Kurumi finally gave in and woke up while yawning and rubbing her eyes. Good morning, Tatsuya. What's the fuss about? Tatsuya pinched her cheeks and asked, how and when the hell did you get a real body? Kurumi, whose cheeks were getting pinched by Tatsuya, had some tears at the corner of her eyes. But as soon as Tatsuya asked the question, her eyes lit up and she said with a smile on her face, Iaa waya ooake. But unfortunately no one understood what she said as she could not speak properly while her cheeks were getting pinched. Tatsuya then stopped pinching her cheeks, making Kurumi immediately rub her now red and swollen cheeks. You are a big meanie. Why did you do that to me? Leaving that aside, Now repeat again. I was not able to understand what you said at that time. Kurumi's brows twitched, but she still calmed herself down and said, I say Ruya to make me a body, and she did just that. Now I have a normal body as well, not just one of those formed by chakra. And when the hell were you going to tell me that? It's your own fault for not realizing it sooner. I was thinking of surprising you as well. Tatsuya then bonked her head lightly and said, It's not my fault, and anyway congratulations on getting a body. Kurumi then puffed up head chest proudly and said, Fu. Tatsuya then sighed, and then looked at his secretary who was still sleeping and asked, And why is she here? Kurumi chuckled, and then started explaining about what happened for Rosweiss to come here. After listening to everything, Tatsuya sighed and said, Looks like she really wants me to cut off her salary a bit. He then patted Rosweiss' head and said, Wake up, Ross, we have work to do. Rosweiss, who was smiling on being petted, took some time, but soon woke up as well, and immediately got embarrassed once she noticed her boss was the one who was petting her. She immediately jumped off the bed and dashed towards the bathroom, not allowing any of the two to say anything. Both Tatsuya and Kurumi looked at each other for a while, and Kurumi, with a shrug of her shoulders, said, She must have built up quite a pressure if she had to rush to the toilet that fast. Tatsuya just smiled wryly and lied back on the bed, seeing which Kurumi soon snuggled beside him. Later that day, after the trio were done with Rosweiss' continuous apologies for getting in his room and hearing Shuri's pleas to not cut her salary, all three of them, along with Serafal, were heading towards the Yukai faction. Surprisingly, Serafal was wearing a kimono, seeing which Kurumi decided to wear one as well, while also making Rosweiss wear one. All of them soon came in front of the temple, and then started climbing up. Soon they came in front of the entrance of the Yukai faction, and the guards who noticed them appeared with their spears pointing towards them, but once they saw Tatsuya they bowed and said, Tatsuya-sama, we apologize for pointing out weapons towards you. Tatsuya just waved his hands and said, No need to worry about that. You guys were doing your duty, right? Anyway, are Yasaka and Kunu here? Hearing that, one of the Tengu guard raised his head and said, Yes, they are here. Shall I inform them about your visit? Tatsuya shook his head and said, Nah, leave it. We will just meet her. Besides, I hardly believe she will not come to know about us visiting her. The guards then stepped aside to let them step inside, and just as the four of them passed through the gate, the surroundings started to change. In front of them, a wild settlement filled with Japanese-style buildings and architecture appeared, and various yukai from different races were visible to them as well. The yukai who felt the presence of Tatsuya and the other three immediately looked at them with fear, but as soon as they noticed Tatsuya and Kurumi, all of them sighed and started greeting the two of them. Rosweiss, who saw what happened, was overwhelmed seeing the popularity of her current boss, and immediately the words that Kurumi told last night came to her mind. Soon a lot of children started surrounding Tatsuya and started asking questions to him, and some of them started to drag him to play with them as well. Tatsuya was in dilemma about what to do, and was about to reject the children as he had still some work to do. The children who felt that Tatsuya was going to reject the offer lowered their ears and looked at him with puppy eyes, which made it very difficult for him to reject them. They even offered to let him touch their ears and tail, which was something that most of them knew was his weakness. But he, being the diligent man he looked away towards his companions and said, You guys go ahead. I will meet you later, and was immediately dragged away by the children who were shouting with joy on their victory. Seeing him getting easily swayed by the children, Rosweiss had some complicated thoughts in her mind and thought, Is he a pedophile? Chapter 213, Meeting the Heroes. A few days have passed since Tatsuya and the others came to the Yukai faction. Serafal has been negotiating with both Yukai and the Shinto faction for all these days, still working to come to an agreement. Tatsuya, on the other hand, was just enjoying his vacation, relaxing in the territory, talking with Susanoo and Tsukiyomi, and going on dates with either the foxes, the magical girl, or the goddess Amaterasu. He has been peacefully living there as Rosweiss has been taking care of the documents in his stead. He was really grateful for her help, and even promised to do any one thing she wants. Currently, Tatsuya, who was waiting for Yasaka and Kunu to come back from the meeting with the leaders of the 5 clans while reading a book. Suddenly the door of the room opened and Kunu came in totally worried. Tatsuya looked at her worried expression and widened his eyes in surprise. He immediately hugged her and started to console the crying girl. He immediately activated his powers, which he has not been using for the past few days, so that he could relax, and in that instant, he activated them. A huge surge of energy enveloped the entire world, but in an instant it died down, not causing any major problems except for the strong people from the major factions getting surprised by the power. He then checked Kunu's memories as she was too panicked to talk, and come to know that the hero faction was trying to kidnap Yasaka, who was currently fighting, and trying to protect Kunu from being kidnapped. He immediately called Kurumi and told her to take care of Kunu and teleported towards Yasaka's position. The leader of the hero faction, Cao Cao, who was wielder of the true Longinus, along with his team, was fighting against Yasaka in a dimension made by Dimension Lost, which made escaping for Yasaka very difficult. What happened, leader of Yukai? Having trouble dealing with us? Yasaka didn't say anything and just narrowed her eyes and said, Who are you, and why have you come to our territory? But before they could answer, Tatsuya appeared in front of Yasaka and said, They are hero wannabes who don't even have the knowledge to say I am here. Seeing him suddenly appear in front of them, Tatsuya raised his hand and said, Yo. Seeing him, the whole hero faction was surprised, not because he was able to enter the dimension, but because all of them could feel that he was a human just like them. Cao Cao narrowed his eyes and said, Shiba Tatsuya, I presume. Looks like the word about a strong human associating with the 3 biblical factions was true. Tatsuya smirked and said, Oh. Aren't I a famous one? And you must be Chow Chow, the wielder of the true Longinus, I guess. Chow Chow smirked as well and said, so you know of me as well, pleasure to meet you. Or so I would like to say, but why are you here? And pointed his spear at Tatsuya. Tatsuya just raised his hands, gesturing him to stop violence, and said, calm down. I am here for a vacation and was searching for my girlfriend. I will just take her and go back. No need to get violent here. Man, I don't wish to fight during my vacation as much as possible. Hearing that, Chow Chow snorted and said, stop taking us as a joke and tell us what is your purpose of coming here. Do you wish to join us fellow humans and show the world that we are the greatest? Tatsuya chuckled and said, no, I am not taking you for a joke. I really came to take her back, and regarding joining you, not interested. So dash. He then turned towards the one wearing glasses and said, it would be better if you could stop using your sacred gear and destroy this dimension of yours. I don't have problem destroying it, but it will only hurt you back, as I can see that you are already pushing the limit of your gear to the maximum you could. So destroying it might injure you. Suddenly, a sword slash came towards Tatsuya's way by the six-handed swordsman of the hero group. Tatsuya looked towards the sized armed swordsman and said in annoyance, man, are all you swordsmen retarded? Why the hell do you all attack someone whom you don't know of so forwardly? He then took out his favorite spoon and casually parried of the swords and said, full counter. And immediately various slash marks appeared on the swordsman's body and was thrown away. Seeing such a thing happen right in front of them, the hero faction members were totally speechless, and George immediately started healing Siegfried. Tatsuya looked at Yasaka and asked, you okay? Feeling pain anywhere? But Yasaka shook her head in denial. Tatsuya nodded and looked back at the hero faction, who were now all aiming their weapons at him. Chow Chow, who was angered by the actions of Tatsuya, started putty Jia's aura in the spear, making it glow, and said, looks like I need to show you the power of the spear that killed the dash. Tatsuya immediately teleported in front of Chow Chow, not giving him any time to register what happened. He then took his spear from his, snapped it in half, and have the two halves back to him, and then teleported back to his original position. God. Chow Chow then looked at his broken spear and then at Tatsuya, then at spear and then back at Tatsuya. He did it for a while until he digested what happened in his brain. His eyes widened in shock and he said, what the hell did you do to my spear? Tatsuya's gaze lowered a bit, and with a smirk on his face he said, dude, you are not big enough to call that a spear. Hearing that, all of them blinked for a while, but soon George realized what Tatsuya meant and looked towards Chow Chow's crotch and muttered, yes, he certainly is not that well endowed in that department. Chow Chow looked at George and then followed his gaze, and immediately his brows twitched and he said, that has nothing to do with it. Jean and the others understood as well but didn't know what to say. Chow Chow immediately unsummoned his spear and then called it back, and it appeared completely fixed. Seeing that, Tatsuya sighed and said, that's why I don't like my opponent to have soul-liked weapons. So are you really set on fighting? All of them pointed their weapons in magic circle towards Tatsuya, making him sigh in annoyance. And I thought I can have a nice vacation.
Chapter 214, Garage Sale.
Tatsuya then took out his Neo Serveresta. If you have forgotten about it, check out Sage 37, and activated it, and a purple energy blade manifested over the handle he was holding. He then brought the sword forward and said, you should go back, Yasaka. I will come back later. And then force teleported her out of George's dimension. Seeing her getting teleported, Chow Chow frowned and thought, you really are acting like a nuisance in our plan. Tatsuya shrugged and said, what? I am just protecting my family. You two will do the same for yours as well, right? Chow Chow smirked and then immediately dashed towards Tatsuya and tried to stab him, but Tatsuya intercepted his attack. Yeah, but only for my family, but unfortunately our mission takes precedence over it. Tatsuya then pushed him back and tried to slash him, but Jean made a wall of swords to block Tatsuya's attack, but Tatsuya immediately destroyed it with his sword. Chow Chow, who was now back to his group, said, and it doesn't seem like you will let us do as we please. Tatsuya then said, oh, believe me, I am the most neutral guy you can find. If someone who is not related to me is your target, then I can assure you that I won't do anything about it. Unless I myself have something to do with it. Chow Chow smiled and said, oh, is that so? Then we will be very grateful for that, but unfortunately this time our target is someone related to you. Tatsuya's sword then changed to green and he said, sorry, I cannot allow that. And then he slashed the air and immediately 6 long green energy blades moved towards all the individuals of the hero faction, making them either dodge or block the slash. That was just a warning. Next time won't be that easy. All of them except for Leonard clicked their tongues, and George then fired a large amount of spells towards him. Tatsuya's eyes then turned red with a pattern inside the eye, and immediately a huge gray skeleton appeared around him and blocked all the attacks. Yes, his Susanoo is gray-colored. Seeing the giant skeleton, all of them were surprised, and George asked, is that a spell or a sacred gear? Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, who knows? Hearing that, George narrowed his eyes, and then looked towards Leonardo and nodded his head. Leonard then raised his hands, and soon his shadow started to expand, and various humanoid beings started to emerge out of it. Tatsuya looked at the creations for a while, and then turned towards Leonardo and asked, does Annihilation Maker allow you to make as many monsters you are capable of making without any side effects, like mental strain or something? Or does it have a mental strain transfer as well? Hearing his question, Leonardo's eyes widened, and he looked towards George to ask what to do, seeing which George smirked and shifted his glasses and said, who knows? Tatsuya gave him the same answer. All of them except for George Sweat dropped at his answer, and even his leader looked at him with a look which was saying, "Really?" Tatsuya then said, "Does it really felt good copying me? If yes, then I am flattered." Tatsuya then looked at Cao Cao and asked, "So why are you after Yasaka?" Cao Cao kept his spear to the side and said, "There is no harm in telling that. We want her power to affect the ley line surrounding Kyoto and summon the Great Red so that we can have a battle of legends between the heroes and dragons." Tatsuya then said, "But there hasn't been any distortion in the dimension to open a path to the dimension gap to our world. So how will you open the path?" Cao Cao smirked and said, "Heh, a few months ago someone opened the dimensional gap. We don't know who, but since then there has been a slight distortion in the space-time bridges between the two. So by using the power of ley lines and the power of dimension lost, we will summon the dragon." Tatsuya, who heard the whole answer, sighed and thought, "That idiot must be me and Ruya. Looks like our battle caused some ripples in there. I will tell her to fix it later." He then gave a tired sigh and said, "Anyway, if you are still going to continue, then please go all out. I don't have time for all this." Cao Cao and his team got serious and narrowed their eyes. He then said, "Don't look down on us, Shiba Tatsuya. We are the hero faction. Even if you're strong, we will not back down. Show him you all. He should know what we are capable of." All of them then started to charge their power for a big attack, sensing which Tatsuya said, "That spear is really something. To be able to release that much aura even when the balance breaker is not activated is amazing." Cao Cao smiled and said, "Want to retreat?" Tatsuya put his sword back in his storage and said, "You know what? I guess I will fight you all a bit seriously after all. You really are thinking rock much of yourself, of you are not even using your balance breaker or your trump card against me." He then moved his hand to his side, and soon a glow started to come out of his hand, making all of them close their eyes because of too much brightness. Soon the glow died down and a huge spear with a broad blade and a glowing energy blade in the middle of it appeared. Hashtag Vasvi Shakti. Tatsuya smirked and said, "So how do you like my spear? It can kill gods as well." He then started pouring energy inside it, making the spear release its already powerful aura, which made the hero faction widen their eyes in surprise. Tatsuya then started to levitate in the air while charging the spear and said, "Willing to use your balance breaker yet?" Cao Cao gulped his saliva and asked, "Why is that spear's energy similar to his?" And just as he said that, a man appeared in front of the hero faction wearing an aloha shirt and a pair of sunglasses. "Because it was made by me. But the real question is, how do you posses it?" Tatsuya looked towards the newcomer and said, "So, the backer is here as well, huh? Oh, and this spear. I bought it in a garage sale a few years ago at a cheap cost. A hell of a deal if you ask me. So are you going to take your guys back, or you are joining as well?" Chapter 215. Getting Serious. Tatsuya and Indra were staring at each other for a while, both not speaking a word, making the tension in the surrounding rise by a lot. Tatsuya, who was getting slightly impatient, asked, "So, you going back, or should I kick your ass before you want to go back?" Frankly saying, "I am not really in the mood for something like this, as currently I am on a vacation, so?" Indra started to fly as well and came to the same height as Tatsuya and asked, "Why are you able to use something that should only be usable by someone whom I have given the authority over it? Are you Karna's incarnation?" Tatsuya shook his head and said, "No, I am not anyone's incarnation. I am just me." Indra narrowed his eyes and said, "Do you think that it is some kind of joke? Forget it. Just give me back my damn spear." "Nope." Hearing that, Indra's brows twitched in anger, and he then said, "Boy, don't drag this for long. That spear is rightfully mine." Tatsuya shook his head and said, "How can I believe that? Are you feeling any sort of connection to this spear? If so, why isn't it reacting to you?" Indra then started to release his divinity, but was not able to feel the connection he expected he would get from the spear, making him surprised. Tatsuya smirked and said, "Not able to feel it, right?" Indra glared at Tatsuya and said, "What game are you playing? Why can't I call my spear?" Tatsuya then said, I don't know, maybe it's not yours, that's why." Indra then summoned a spear and pointed it towards Tatsuya and said, "Give it back. You are not worthy enough to wield it. I don't know what thing are you using to block my connection with it, but I will not allow you to use it. If I am planning to wage war on Shiva, then AI might need all resources I can gather, and yet I am not able to get access to something that belongs to me." Tatsuya just stared blankly at him and said, "First of all, this spear is not yours. It's something that I created, copied. Second, you are in a territory that is technically mine, while Yasaka and Amy are technically with me. Third, killing you will only cause more problems for me in the future, so I would rather not do that." Indra then said, "Firstly, I don't care. Secondly, we are currently in George's dimension. Thirdly, how can killing me cause you more problems if I am not around anymore?" Tatsuya then said, "It's simple. Currently, you are still not blacklisted from the Hindu faction, and killing you will agitate many gods and people of your faction, which will in turn come to me seeking for revenge. I destroy the faction, then the allies of your faction will come seeking for revenge. I destroy all the allies, then the remaining factions will try to group together and deal with me as I am a supposed threat for their faction. I destroy them. No factions left. I will have to take responsibility to take care of the areas left behind by those factions. It's nothing but trouble." Hearing that, all of them got silent and looked at Tatsuya with a deadpan expression on their faces and thought at the same time, "Isn't he thinking way too deeply? Stop speaking nonsense. You are talking as if you can defeat all the factions on your own." Tatsuya didn't say anything and just looked at him with a neutral expression on his face, seeing which Indra's lips twitched and he thought, is he really thinking that way? Cao Cao looked at Tatsuya and thought, So he is as confident as us knowing that we humans can best them all. He then smirked and thought, his thinking is just like us. Tatsuya, who heard him, thought, not even a bit. I have no wish of flaunting my status to the whole supernatural world. I already have enough on my plate to take care of. Suddenly Tatsuya moved the spear, blocking an attack coming towards him. So you can react to such an attack, huh? Looks like you will not be that boring. Tatsuya looked at Indra, who had a smirk on his face, and sighed. He then stared directly in Indra's eyes and said, don't say that I didn't warn you before, and you are the one who is picking fight with me. He then pushed Indra back and immediately thrusted his spear towards Indra's chest, but Indra moved immediately as well and blocked the attack with his own spear, but was pushed back a few meters away. You pack quite a punch as well. He then narrowed his eyes and said, let's start getting serious, and started releasing his aura, because of which the dimension started to shake and threatened to collapse at any moment. Seeing his dimension shaking, George started to panic, but Tatsuya immediately maintained the dimension and looked towards the hero faction and said, I don't think you all will be able to get out for a while. Just stay back and put a barrier or something around you. The hero faction jumped back and took a reasonable distance from the two, and George immediately formed a barrier around them. Chow Chow looked at his spear and felt that it was trying to tell him something. It must be the god-slaying ability of the spear. It must be sensing his divinity. He then turned around to focus on the two fighters, but immediately his eyes widened in shock. He looked around at the fellow members of his team and saw that they were completely shocked by the sight in front of them as well. Indra, who was done powering up, summoned another spear and threw it towards Tatsuya, who just destroyed it with a slash from his own, but then immediately tilted his head when he noticed the god trying to stab him with his spear. He then thrusted his spear towards Indra, who just deflected it with his magic. Both of them took a distance from each other and stared at one another for a while when all of a sudden both of them vanished from their spots.
Asterisk boom asterisk. Asterisk boom asterisk. Asterisk boom asterisk.
A series of large explosions could be heard by the others, but the onlookers were not able to make out what was happening. Siegfried and Chow Chow, who had fastest reaction times in the group, had cold sweat dripping down their foreheads, and both of them gulped their saliva. And Chow Chow, what is this kind of speed? Siegfried nodded his head and said, yeah, I could only see their after images at best. Hearing what the two members of their team said, the others were looked at the two for a while and then back at the sky. Is this happening just from the two of them clashing with one another? In the sky, Indra and Tatsuya were constantly attacking and blocking each other's attacks, and Indra, who had an excited expression on his face, felt that they were almost at an equal level. But suddenly he noticed something, and immediately his expression changed, and he now had a frown on his face. He gritted his teeth in anger and used a bit more strength in his next attack, which Tatsuya blocked once again while having a neutral expression on his face. I glared at Tatsuya and said, You are not even half serious about this, right? Tatsuya didn't say anything and just stared at him with his usual cold expression, which only made the god more pissed at the human in front of him. Chow Chow and the others were confused by what Indra was saying and asked, what's the matter? Indra continued to glare at Tatsuya while trying to push him away and said, this boy is mocking me by not even using half of his strength in the battle. Hearing which, all of them got even more surprised. Tatsuya, who was blocking the god's attack, thought, well, he is correct in a sense. I'm not even using half of my physical capabilities, and regarding magic or anything else, well, that would be overkill. Suddenly Indra used his whole body got covered with lightning, seeing which Tatsuya pushed him back, wanting to know what the god was trying to do. But just as he pushed him back, a flash passed by him, making Tatsuya a bit surprised, and he then moved his spear and blocked the spear which was going to pierce him. Again a flash passed by him, and once again he blocked the spear. So you can keep up with this as well, huh? Indra then took some distance from him and summoned a large number of lightning around him and fired them all towards Tatsuya, who just teleported behind Indra and tried to stab him, but Indra noticed that, immediately flickered behind Tatsuya and once again fired the spears at Tatsuya. Tatsuya immediately used a barrier to block the attack, seeing which Indra smirked and said, so you finally decided to use your magic, huh? And then immediately rushed towards Tatsuya with a huge spear in his hand, trying to stab through the barrier and attack Tatsuya. But all of a sudden, a huge pressure enveloped the dimension, making it start shaking once again. Everyone in the dimension started looking around to see what was happening, but then noticed Tatsuya, whose eyes were glowing while a small amount of his aura was leaking unconsciously. Tatsuya looked at Indra, and immediately Indra stopped moving, making the god look at his body in surprise. He then looked at Tatsuya, who was staring directly in Indra's eyes, making the god feel a chill run down his spine, which made him shocked. He felt fear from the human in front of him. Indra, noticing this, internally cursed himself and glared at Tatsuya. Tatsuya removed the barrier around him and then stabilized the dimension so that it wouldn't collapse and said, so shall we get serious now? And for the first time since the beginning of the battle smiled at Indra. Chapter 216. Let's get more serious. Indra, who looked at Tatsuya's smile, gulped his saliva and tried to move away and attack him, but some mysterious force was preventing him from moving. He glared at Tatsuya and asked, is this your doing? Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, what? I am trying to be a bit serious here, so of course I will hold back a little less. Now on to the main topic dash. Tatsuya then looked directly in your Indra's eyes and asked, so how do you want to get your ass kicked? The boring way or the cool way? Oh, and of course I would be the one who will look cool here. Indra glared at Tatsuya and said, do whatever you want, but keep this in mind, I will not back down. Tatsuya looked at him with a deadpan look and said, so let's go with cool mode. If I use the boring way, you will break instantly. Tatsuya looked towards the hero faction, or more particularly at Cao Cao. Seeing his gaze, all of them got stiff and gulped their saliva, hoping that the monster in human skin don't come their way for the attack. Tatsuya just focused on the true Longinus and traced it, and then looked back at Indra and said, "You want a spear, right?" And then smirked and said, "Then let's start with the cool/Chuani process.
Rap style. I am the bone of my sword.
Steel is my body and fire is my blood. I have created over 1,000 blades, unknown to death, nor known to life, have withstood pain to create many weapons. Yet, those hands will never hold anything. So as I pray, unlimited blade works, jutsu." Suddenly the dimension started to get bright, and soon all of them shut their eyes from the brightness. Soon the light started to die down, and Indra and the hero faction opened their eyes only to find themselves in a different location, one where the ground was stabbed with countless weapons. Indra and hero faction looked around with a confused expression on their faces, and Indra asked, "Where are we?" Suddenly Tatsuya appeared out of nowhere and said, "Well, you are currently in my dimension. I thought that the previous dimension could collapse any moment if started to get a bit serious, so now we are here." He then smiled and said, "Now, time for your spears," and raised his hand, and countless number of true Longinus, Busby Shakti, and a lot of different kind of spear came out of the ground and floated behind him. Seeing the scene in front of them, the hero faction was completely speechless, especially Cao Cao, as he noticed countless number of true Longinus behind Tatsuya. While Indra, though, was a bit surprised by the scene, he was mostly pissed as he could clearly feel that there were countless number of the spears he had made, yet he could not control any of them. Tatsuya then pointed his finger towards Indra, and immediately all the spears rushed towards him at a frightening speed. The hero faction immediately jumped back, not wanting to get in their way, while Indra once again covered his body with lightning and started dodging and firing spears of lightning towards the incoming wave of spears. Tatsuya, who saw Indra using all he had to dodge the spears, chuckled and said, "Looks like you can still keep up, then how about this?" Suddenly the whole ground glowed and various spears appeared bonnet and pointed towards the sky, making Indra pale, not because of the number of spears, but because he could feel that each and every one of the spears below him was a god slayer. Tatsuya chuckled and said, "Looks like this is still not enough for you." And then his eyes turned into Sharingan, and a huge grey Tengu came in sight of Indra and the hero faction, making them completely speechless. The Tengu then moved his arm, and a huge spear appeared in its hand, like Shirsuke Susanoo. Indra looked at Tatsuya with his eyes and mouth wide open in shock, not able to think what to say about the situation he was currently in. There was no way that he could dodge or protect himself from any of this, not to mention, "Why the hell are you making me not move at all? At least give me that much freedom." But Tatsuya, who still had a smile on his face, looked at Indra and said, "Oh, is this still nothing compared to you? Then let me get even more serious." And then made 24 more clones of himself clad in a Susanoo, making a total of 25. Seeing 24 more giants appear in front of them, both the hero faction and Indra wanted to cough blood at this sight. What no match for Indra, it was straight up bullying now. Indra wanted to argue and opened his mouth, but Tatsuya immediately interjected him and said, "No need to say anything. I understand what you want to say. This is still nothing compared to your godly caliber, right? Then let's get even more serious here." And various more clones, this time without a Susanoo, appeared on top of the Susanoo's head with different swords and weapons in their hands, though all of them could feel that the weapons were strong as hell, especially a sword-like weapon with a golden hilt and a 3 black, spiraling parts over it, which were releasing a huge amount of energy. Not to mention half of them were wielding the same sword-like, spiraling weapon. Indra and the hero faction were not sure anymore what to say about the current situation. This cannot be called even bullying anymore. Tatsuya was clearly playing with him now. Tatsuya, who was hearing their thoughts for a while, smiled and said, "You all must be thinking that I am just massacring him. But don't worry, I am not cruel. I give you all my word that Indra will not die, even if he wanted to." Tatsuya then looked at Indra and said, "In fact, you will not even feel any of these attacks hit you, at least till you wake up." Indra, who heard that, wanted to ask what he was talking about, but then Tatsuya appeared in front of him with his Sharingan activated and said, "Now look into my eyes and drift up to dreamland of hell." Suddenly the scene in front of Indra's eyes changed, and he found himself in a completely dark space with his hands and legs bound by some sort of chains. He tried to break free from them, but all his efforts were in vain. He gritted his teeth and said, "Why is this happening to me? I just wanted that spear." "Ah, you wanted a spear." Out of nowhere Indra heard a voice and turned his head only to find a bulky man wearing a magical girl costume. The man/woman then took a magic wand and said, "Don't worry, magical girl, Miltan will fulfill your wish," and shook his wand as some glitters came out of it. Indra looked at the man/woman with an annoyed expression and thought, "What the hell is this comedian doing here? /in. What else she is going to do some tragedy *cough *cough comedy. Comedy? Do some comedy? Yeah, that's all." Suddenly, when the glitter coming out of the wand fell on the ground, a few more men/women appeared near the previous one. The original looked at the newcomers and said, "Magical girls, our friend here is in need of our help. Darling, want some spears?" The group nodded enthusiastically and then walked towards the chained god and then surrounded him. Indra looked at all of them and asked, "What the hell are you all Waiaritos doing? Release me this instant." One of the bulky man/woman said, "Oh, we will help you in your release." Indra nodded and waited for them to release the shackles, but then felt something on his butt, and his whole body shivered. He wanted to turn around and look who was it, but then he felt another pair of hands holding his head in place, and saw the man/woman's face just an inch away from his own, making him flinch on instinct. Now then, let us show you our spear-wielding. And immediately someone tore off his clothes. Indra's eyes widened in shock, and it was at that moment he knew he fuck asterisk ed up. Got fuck asterisk ed? Chapter 217. Sparing the Heroes. After months of closed-door cultivation, Indra, who was on the verge of having a mental breakdown, got out of the darkness and was once again in the dimension from where it all started, but not ice that his whole body was pierced by a lot of spears and his wild body was covered in blood. He could feel pain even while breathing and was barely able to open his eyes. Tatsuya, who noticed that the god was now back to his senses, unsummoned all his clones and weapon, including the ones impaled in his body, and went towards the god. Once he was in front of him, Tatsuya lifted his hand and Indra was now back to his original state. Indra looked at his body and tried to move it, but didn't say anything. He was afraid that if he were to say anything, the human in front of him would get even more serious, and that was not good for him. He don't want to feel any more spear-wielding. Tatsuya, who heard his thoughts, smirked and asked, "Was that enough, or should I get even more C-?" Indra immediately raised his hands up and said, "No need, I surrender, I surrender. Don't get any more serious, I have seen enough. Please, I beg you, don't get serious anymore," and then immediately got on his fours while floating in the air. The hero faction, who looked at their backer prostrating in front of the human, were surprised, but not that much. Though they might not be aware of all the things that happened to him, what all they had seen was enough for them to think that Indra was doomed for. They had seen many spear piercing him over and over again, and how his body kept on healing as well, which was continued by even more attacks by the giants and spiraling sword thing. Susanoo and Ie. Tatsuya looked at the god who was begging him for mercy, and with an innocent smile on his face asked, "Didn't you want this spear?" and moved the spear which was in his hand towards the god, who immediately backed away a few meters from him and said, "I am not going to touch any spears from now on. And by any I mean any, you understand that? Not touching it," and crossed his arms in a cross-like manner. #Wakanda salute. Tatsuya just stared at Indra for a sh, while who was looking back at him with a reluctant look on his face. Tatsuya then smirked and moved the spear forward, and Indra immediately moved away from him. "Don't bring that thing near me." "But it's yours, right?" "I don't want it." "No, I don't even want to look at it." "Oh, don't be like that. Come here, take it." And then once again moved forward, and Indra started running away, and Tatsuya started chasing him. For some reason, he found chasing after the god, who was scared as hell, just on seeing the spear, felt amusing to Tatsuya, and he did it for a few minutes before he felt bored and stopped. Indra then landed beside the hero faction and Tatsuya in front of them. Both the parties stared at each other for a while, with the hero faction getting a bit wary and uncomfortable being in presence of Tatsuya. All of them remained silent for a while when suddenly Indra said, "Chow Chow, can you keep that spear away from me?" Chow Chow, who heard him, looked at him strangely for a while, but soon complied with it. Tatsuya looked at Indra and said, "I am surprised that you can still be rational after all that." Indra felt a shiver run down his spine just remembering about what happened to him in that back world, and looked at Tatsuya and said, "That was way too cruel of you, and you dare use that against a god like me. If I haven't sealed my conscious and meditative state, I would have broken down long ago." Tatsuya, who heard him, widened his eyes and nodded his head and said, "I see. So there is a way to counter this technique by the normal people as well. I thought only people like Barakeel can overcome this, but it seems that I was wrong. Well, I get to learn something new anyways." Indra looked at Tatsuya and asked, "So what will you do now?" "I have tried, but I cannot leave this dimension, so what will you do to us?" Hearing that, the hero faction tensed up as well, and got prepared to fight, even though it would just be a useless struggle on their part. Tatsuya looked at them and said, "Keep your weapons back and go back to the attire with which you all go in public. I will get us out of here now." All of their eyes widened, and they looked at Tatsuya as if he had grown a second head. Chow Chow came forwards and said, Wait. You will let us go just like that? We literally attacked you. And we even tried to capture the Yukai leader." Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Your attacks meant nothing to me, and regarding the attack on Yasaka, there was not even a scratch on her, and you would not have been able to beat her anyway. And if by some method you would have captured her or made a fatal attack on her, a barrier would have activated which would have notified me about that, and you all would have been dead the moment I came into the field. Besides, I already beat you all more than enough earlier, so all is fine." He then looked at Indra and said, "And regarding you, there was no reason for us to fight in the first place. You just started attacking me for the spear, and I fought back in self-defense. It's not like you all were here to kill anyway, and I am on a vacation as well, so I don't want to deal with the annoyance of capturing or killing a god who is still not blacklisted in his own faction and a faction from the Cows Brigade, which would make them try to neutralize potential threat, which will lead to further killing, and then more brave idiots will come which will make me do more killing, and then more and more. Finally, no faction would be left, and I would have to maintain the whole world. No thanks, I already have enough to deal with." Hearing that, all of them once again felt a rike on their brows, hearing that Tatsuya was still thinking that he could take on entire factions on their own. But this time they thought that it was somewhat possible after seeing his strength. Tatsuya then snapped his fingers, and all of them came back to Kyoto. Indra looked around, and after confirming that he was back in his world, he sighed, and apologized to Tatsuya for the inconvenience, and then left. Chow Chow and the others were about to hoe back, but Tatsuya stopped them and said, "You all are not thinking of doing something funny here again, are you?" All of them stopped on their tracks and looked at Tatsuya and didn't say anything. Tatsuya stared back at them and sighed. He looked at Chow Chow and asked, "What is your goal?" Chow Chow was surprised for an instant but then said, "To show the whole world that humans are on top." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yeah, and do you really think that the method that you are using will help you reach that goal?" Chow Chow, who heard Tatsuya, looked at him with a confused expression on his face and wanted him to continue what he wants to say. Tatsuya said, "I mean, just think about it. A faction that appeared out of nowhere summoned the strongest being of the world, which let us assume that you all somehow managed to defeat. Not that you all will last even a second against her, but let's leave it at that. How many do you think going to believe that?" Hearing that all the hero faction members thought about it for a while, and some thoughts about what Tatsuya was saying was true came in their minds. Tatsuya then said, "And if you all get killed while fighting Great Red, then forget about making a name for yourselves. No one will even know that you all ever existed. And let us assume that you were somehow able to defeat the dragon, and some people believe that as well. Then the many factions around the world will come for your head, and let us assume this as well, that you were able to defeat all the factions as well. Then too your mission will fail." Chow Chow raised his brows and asked, "How?" Tatsuya nonchalantly said, "Just think about it. If there is no supernatural or factions around the world, who will tell about your supposed legends to the others, and soon your names will be forgotten as well. And if you are killed by someone else, your aim to show the world that the humans are on top will automatically fail. Not to mention your names will go down as criminals in the history as well." All of them got shocked by Tatsuya's explanation and didn't want to believe him but were not able to retort him. George then asked, "So what do you think that we should do?" Tatsuya looked at George and smirked, seeing that they took his bait, and said, "Why not start making your name by fighting beings at your level, not in the way of killing them? Rather challenge them to a duel. This will both serve as your goal and training. Not to mention you would be able to form connections with other supernatural as well, and even if you don't work with them, you all still would not be on their wrong side. Hopefully. But still that will help you all slowly make your name in the supernatural world without getting bad rumors about you all." George and the others thought about what Tatsuya said and began pondering about the topic. Seeing Tatsuya decided to give the final blow and said, "You know, even Valley and his team fights with gods and other supernatural often, and don't have that many bad rumors about them, as they usually ask for a formal duel or training from their opponents. They have many connections as well. You know Valley?" "Yeah, he usually comes to get his butt kicked from time to time. Not to mention Kuroka is my mate too." All of them were surprised by the sudden information, but Tatsuya then said, "There is one more thing that I want to talk about, but I will tell you that when you all decide to change the path you all are walking on. Here, take this calling circle. I don't think I need to tell you how this works." George then took the paper with the magic circle and scribed on it, and then scanned it and nodded his head. Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, tell me when you change your mind, in a warning. No, a promise to you all. I don't care whether you change your ways or not. But if you dare threaten someone related to me, whether knowingly or unknowingly, I will not show you mercy like this again. Today, I let you all go just because you all didn't came with the intention of killing or hurt Yasaka by mistake. But I know this as well, that mistakes don't happen all the time. So be careful who you choose to target." He then waited for them to digest all the information and saw them teleport away. He then made sure that no other suspicious person was in vicinity and said, "Well, they did had valuable info in their brain that Vala didn't have. Looks like he isn't liked much in the Cows Brigade. Well, if they change, I might take them under me as well and make them work undercover for me. If that does not happen, then me letting them live was a bad gamble. Not something that I can't take care of. Vala's Gramps is working fast as well." He then gave a tired sigh and said, "Which means that more problems to take care of will arise, and I just happen to govern the center of most problematic events." He sighed once again, and then went back to the base of the Yukai faction. Chapter 218. Animal Features. Tatsuya returned back to the Yukai faction, and was immediately tackled by Kunu, who kept crying and thanking him for saving her mother. Tatsuya comforted her for a while, and then put her in bed as she cried herself to sleep. Tatsuya then decided to report the incident to Yasaka without mentioning the involvement of the Hindu god, as the matter with the god was his own conflict, not theirs. All of them discussed about the matter, and finally the Shinto and Yukai faction decided to join the alliance, as the security issues were getting a bit problematic since the members of Cows Brigade were able to enter their territory without any problem. Serafal sighed, seeing that she was finally able to convince the factions to join the alliance, but still felt a bit bitter as it was because of the Cows Brigade's invasion and not her negotiating skill, because of which they decided to join the alliance. Tatsuya, who noticed this, consoled his magical girl for the whole day, but was not able to make much of a progress. He sighed and said, "Well, looks like I don't have any other way," and carried her in his arms, much to the Mao's surprise, and said, "Tonight, I will have a battle with magical girl Saratan. In the bed, that is," and took her to his bedroom. Serafal, who was feeling depressed for the whole day, was surprised by the sudden events and was not able to register what was happening. After she was able to digest what was going on in her brain, she found herself to be in a dimly lit room with Tatsuya sitting in front of her on a futon. W8 Tatsuya dash. But Tatsuya stopped her from saying anything by sealing her mouth with his own. Serafal, who was kissed out of nowhere by Tatsuya, blinked her eyes in surprise, but soon went along with it and started kissing back. Tatsuya noticed that and inwardly smirked, thinking that he was finally able to distract her. He then slowly pushed her back on the bed and then started to open the kimono that she has been wearing from the time she came to Kyoto. He also undid her hair bun, making her long hair to be seen in full glory, which was very rare for him, as he had never seen her hair without being tied. He then stopped kissing her and moved a bit back to let the devil take in some breath and said, "So were you saying something?" Serafal looked at Tatsuya, still gasping for air, and said, "I was saying that let me prepare my heart for it, but it's fine now." She then looked at her almost open yukata and untied hair and said, "No point in stopping here anyway. So how do I look with my hair like this?" Tatsuya caressed her hair and said, "Lovely." Serafal chuckled and said, "Now then, let this magical girl show you some of her tricks," and then pushed Tatsuya back and got on top of his and started kissing him once again while taking off his shirt. Tatsuya also noticed someone sneaking inside the room, but knowing who the person was, he let it be, and then placed a barrier around the room for no sound to escape from the room. Serafal, who felt the barrier around the room, smile mischievously, but then she realized someone else was in the room as well, and tensed up, but soon calmed down feeling who the person was. "Yasaka-san, it is not good to enter someone else's room." "Era, Serafal-san. I thought that something fun was going in here, so I decided to join. I hope you don't mind." Serafal turned around and saw Yasaka wearing her usual yellow kimono with her ears and tails out. Seeing that, Serafal narrowed her eyes and said, "Seeing that you have your ears and tails out, you decided to play serious, right? So me saying that I mind doesn't matter at all." Yasaka just chuckled and said, "I don't know what you were talking about." "Fufu." Serafal sighed and said, "Fine. I am a generous magical girl, so I will let you in." "Oh, then you won't mind me either, right?" And then Kurumi, who was inside Tatsuya, materialized beside him and kept Tatsuya's head on her lap. But once Tatsuya and the others saw her, all of them were surprised. Tatsuya moved his hand forward and caressed something and asked, "Kurumi, since when did you have fox ears and tail in your human form?" "Fufufu. Well, when my body was made by Ruya, I asked for some customizations. You like it, right?" Tatsuya caressed her ears and tails, and immediately her started rubbing his face with her tails and said, "Yeah, they really are soft," and had a small smile on his face. Yasaka looked at Kurumi and said, "So you also got your own tails and ears, huh? Well, looks like a new teammate to the Foxear group." Kurumi, who was feeling ecstatic by her tails and ears being caressed by Tatsuya, only gave a nod to her before she was subdued by Tatsuya's caressing. She now understood why those Nekashu, Kunu, and Yasaka always pester him to caress their ears and tails. It really felt like a bliss to them. Serafal, who being left behind by the other, was a bit upset, but then she realized something and said with a smile on her face, "Oh, don't underestimate the magical girl," and took out a Rigi out of nowhere and wore it, and immediately a pair of bunny ears and tail appeared on her body. "This magical girl have her own ways, peon." Tatsuya and the others were surprised seeing Serafal having a pair of rabbit ears and tail, but had to admit that she looked cute. Serafal chuckled and said, "You like it, right? You should have. There is no way that all that time I gave up on pestering Ajuka-chan to make me this would be wasted." Suddenly her ears changed to cat ears along with her tail, and she slowly walked towards Tatsuya on her fours, and licked his cheek and said, "Or, you like this instead, nya." Tatsuya caressed her ears, and found that they were indeed real and not an illusion as he noticed Serafal yelp when he caressed her ears. Tatsuya pulled Serafal close to him and laid her on his lap and asked while caressing her, "So you made Ajuka make a device which will give you the features of different animals?" Serafal, who had a silly grin on her face, nodded her head. Makiji, the others except for Tatsuya, a bit surprised, and Kurumi and Yasaka said at the same time, "So that means you can take any animal features, and you are using it for something like this?" Serafal looked at the two foxes and said, "Like you are one to talk, aren't you both doing the same with yours as well? It's not like you need to be in your yukai form when you are planning to do something like this." Tatsuya then hugged her from behind and said, Now, no need to fight. Rather, shall we start from where we left off?" And without even saying anything, Serafal pushed his back and once again got on top of him. "Sure, but Saratan will be first." Chapter 219. The Train Trip to Kyoto. A few days have passed since Tatsuya's confrontation with the hero faction and Indra, and currently he was in his Kyoto branch office going through some documents. Knock knock asterisk. Enter. The door of the room opened and Rosweiss came inside and said, "It's time. I just got the call from Miyuki telling that the train have left the station." Tatsuya stood up from his chair, stretched his body and said, "Then I should get going and join them on the trip." He then walked towards the door and was about to get out of the room, but then Rosweiss said, "You cannot ho there in your adult form." Tatsuya stopped on his tracks and then looked at his body and then towards Rosweiss. "Thanks for telling," and patted her shoulder, making the silver-haired lady smile in response. Tatsuya then changed back to his teenager form and also changed to his school uniform and said, "Well, see you in a few hours. I have already booked a room for you and Shuri in the hotel we will be staying at under my name, so tell her that she can take a day off." Rosweiss nodded with a smile on her face and then thanked Tatsuya. She was happy to be able to work under such working conditions where both the pay and treatment were good, and had pledged to herself that she will never let go of this job. Tatsuya then teleported to the train's washroom, and then casually came out of it and noticed Isami near the basin with Asia healing her. He went towards the two of them, making both of them surprised noticing that someone else was there as well, but both of them sighed seeing that it was Tatsuya, and not some random human whose memories they had to remove because of seeing something supernatural. Tatsuya gave both of them a peck on their cheeks and asked, "So what happened for you to be treated during the train trip?" Asia looked at Tatsuya and said, "She was asked for a duel by Sarorg-san and well, in simple words, she lost pretty badly." Tatsuya looked at Isami, who immediately averted her eyes and said, "What? Don't look at me like that. I didn't go all out. I didn't use my Dragon Slayer powers." Tatsuya shook his head and said, "Nah, you would still have lost even if you had used your Dragon Slayer powers. He can beat you pretty easily. And why did you not use your Dragon Slayer powers?" Isami looked at Tatsuya with pout and then said, "Well, He was a devil and not a dragon, so it would not have been effective much anyway, and it was just a casual duel, so showing up all my cards in the first place without knowing his true intentions is totally foolish. Tatsuya smiled and said, and did you know something about his intentions after the duel? Isami sighed and said, he is just a battle maniac, who only wants to fight someone strong, especially those who are power types, and go out in an all-out brawl. Tatsuya nodded and said, good deduction. He then placed his hand on her shoulders and asked, but that still doesn't explain how you are still injured. Isami then looked towards Asia, who with a smile on her face said, well, the fact that she lost a Saorg is still truth, so some extra punishment as a training must accompany the loss. Isami narrowed her eyes and said, that doesn't mean you and Shizuka-san ganging upon me in a not-so-mock battle. Tatsuya looked at Asia, who was smiling, and said, don't any violent to others, especially your friends. Asia then said, I did that only for her own good, so that she can beat Saorg in the next battle, which is the rating game, which will happen soon and doesn't tarnish your name. Tatsuya nodded and said, but still don't hurt her this much, that she needs to get treated on the train trip. And Isami, get ready for the next training session, it will be with Tiamat. Hearing which, immediately both the sacred gear and his host panicked, but were not able to refute when they saw Tatsuya's smiling face. Tatsuya then used his magic to heal Isami faster, and then left the washroom. All of them then got to their seats, and Tatsuya found himself sitting in between Himari and Zenovia. Tatsuya looked at the two girls, one lying on his lap and the other on his shoulder, and asked the other girls, so what group am I in? Kagura smiled and said, you will be in our group with me, Himari, Asia, Isami, Zenovia, and Irina. Tatsuya was surprised and asked, seriously, such a convenient group was able to be formed. I thought the others will protest, especially the boys, for me being the lone boy in the group of girls. Asia smiled and said, don't worry, the things went smoothly. Our classmates are surprisingly supportive. Isami looked at her and thought, you were the one threatened the homeroom teacher to form that group. And I was the one who threatened the whole class to shut up, or you will shut them up for eternity. Tatsuya, who heard her, blinked his eyes in surprise and looked towards Asia and said, you should not threaten the classmates and teachers, Asia. Asia, whose lie was caught by Tatsuya, just looked away and started talking to random girls of the class, seeing which Tatsuya just sighed and said, whatever I will do with her. And Himari, I know you are already awake. Himari, who was pretending to sleep in his lap, slowly opened her eyes and saw Tatsuya looking at her and said, don't mind me. This place is just comfortable, plus I can fill up my Tatsuya reserves for the days that you were gone. Don't act spoiled, see how Kagura is behaving. Learn from her example. Oh, her turn to refill her gauges during night. We made the Nekishu agreement. The day is mine and the night is hers. And then snuggled in his lap. Tatsuya looked at Kagura, who just smiled at him. More importantly, tell the other one who is sleeping using your shoulder as a pillow. Tatsuya looked at the blue-haired girl who was dozing off before he even got there and said, well, she looks genuinely tired as she has black circles under her eyes. Seems like she was finishing up her assignments before going to the trip. So let her sleep. Chapter 220. Arriving at Kyoto. Tatsuya and his classmates soon reached Kyoto, and Tatsuya then decided to wake up the blue-haired girl who was using his shoulder as a pillow. Tatsuya shook her a bit, making Zenovia squirm a bit and saying, you just a bit more. And snuggled up to Tatsuya even more, grabbing his arm with both her hands. Seeing that she was not going to wake up easily, Tatsuya did the most logical thing. He directed his killing intent on the blue-haired girl, making the holy sword wielder and the former church exorcist immediately open her eyes and take distance from Tatsuya while preparing for a fight. Zenovia looked around only to find her classmates picking up their things and getting seated as they were about to reach their destination. Tatsuya looked at the confused Zenovia and asked, we are about to reach the station, so I took it upon myself to bring you back from the world of dreams. Zenovia looked at Tatsuya for a while till she finally realized what was happening and widened her eyes in surprise. She then sighed and said, I was very tired, you know. You should have just let me sleep. Like I said, we are about to reach Kyoto, so it was important to wake you up. You could have just let me sleep till we reached there. Anyways, you still were able to perceive my killing intent even when you were asleep. Looks like your senses have not dulled even after living in comfort for a while. Don't try to change the subject. And yeah, there is no way that I will be totally defenseless while sleeping. Tatsuya grinned and said, says the one who was sleeping like a baby while leaning on my shoulder just a moment ago. Looks pretty cute and defenseless to me. And patted her head. Zenovia, who heard what she just did, blushed in embarrassment at her mistake for being defenseless, but then she realized something and thought, did he call me cute? She was about to ask him, but Tatsuya suddenly stood up and said, well, we are here. Let's get going. And then got in line to get off the train. All the other girls stood up as well except for the confused Zenovia, who soon followed the others and got in the line as well. Himari, who was standing beside Zenovia, whispered in her ear, yeah, he called you cute, so stop being dazed, or you will bump into someone. Zenovia looked at Himari and then asked, is that true? Will he make babies with me if he thinks that I am cute? Which immediately got the attention of all the other girls from the group. Irina immediately said, now, there is no way that will happen, right? And looked at the other girls. All the other girls nodded and said, well, he is not someone to do that with anyone he finds cute. Asia then said, the chances are higher though. Fighchan, Ophis, took the least time to get laid after understanding her feelings for him. And he finds her the cutest. All of them got silent, but then Isami said, well, doesn't that depend on the opportunity and him being in relationship with the said person? Himari nodded as well. Correct. It doesn't just depend whether he calls someone cute or not. Even Sona, whom he constantly teases because of her being cute, is still virgin. Kuo High. Student Council. Sitting on her desk, Sona, who was going through some documents, suddenly sneezed, making her queen to turn around and focus on her queen. Sona rubbed her nose and said, "Who is talking behind my back?" Tsubaki went back to her work and then nonchalantly said, "Must be someone popularizing your virginity," making Sona immediately glare at her queen. Tsubaki just ignored her gaze, but then suddenly realized something and said, "Ah, I totally forgot." She took out her phone and walked towards Sona and said, "Sarah Falsama sent a message," and showed her phone to her king, making Sona widen her eyes in surprise. In the phone screen, Sarah Fall was lying on bare-chested sleeping Tatsuya, while kissing his cheek with their bodies covered with a sheet. There was also a message written on the bottom of the picture. "One-ichan wins." Face blowing a kiss, face blowing a kiss. Tsubaki then took the phone back and looked at Sona, who was still surprised, and said, "Want to form an alliance for the greater good," and moved her hand forward. Sona immediately came out of her stupor and grabbed Tsubaki's hand and said, "For the greater good then." And both of them shook their hand while both of them thought at the same time, "I will be going before you though." Zenobia, who was confused about her situation, asked, "So will he or will he not?" Kagura placed her hand on Zenovia's shoulder and said, "If your only intention is to have his babies, then he will definitely not. If you don't have any affection towards him, then it is just impossible." Zenovia stared at Kagura for a while and then started thinking about it, but was soon brought out of her thoughts when Tatsuya said, "Well, looks like you all are enjoying the talk. But please keep your surroundings in check. I had to make a barrier around you all to keep your talk to yourselves, and just so you all know, we are already at the hotel." All the girls immediately snapped back to reality and looked towards the hotel building and said at the same time, "When no, how did we come here?" Tatsuya threw their bags back to them and said, "By the hell of yours truly. Now take your bags and check in your rooms. Text me if you have some plans about going around or resting. We are free till evening anyway," and then went to his assigned room. All the girls looked at Tatsuya's back and Asia suddenly said, "Ah, he didn't tell us which is his room?" Suddenly all of them heard a voice, "Fear not, because I am here. Hashtag All Might Face." All the girls turned around and saw a black-haired lady with a small ponytail and wearing a kimono with a hand on her cheek. "Shuri-san, long time no see. Are you again slacking off on your work? Tatsuya will get angry at you." Shuri chuckled and said, Era Himari-chan. Don't worry, I have boss's permission to take a day off. In fact, he was the one who gave me this day off. Isn't that right, Rossweiss?" And turned her head to the side. A silver-haired lady who was sitting on the bench wearing kimono looked towards the person who called her name and said, "Yeah, Tatsuya indeed gave her a day off." Hearing that, all the girl from Shiba residence were surprised and said, "You are joking, right? Did you actually started working seriously?" Shuri's brows twitched and she said, "Wow, I can see how much do you all believe in me." Asia then cheerfully said, "Just be happy knowing that we have a better image of you compared to your husband," which made all of them silent, remembering the Barracule's deeds. Chapter 221. Peeping. After the girls went to their assigned rooms and kept their luggage in, they decided to tour around Kyoto. And even though the girls from Tatsuya's team had already visited Kyoto a lot of times while meeting the Yukai and Shinto faction, they too were a bit excited to go around and guide Isami, Zenovia, and Irina around the place. Tatsuya, who got this information, called in Kunu to join them, which she happily did. She too was happy since her friends were visiting her after a long time, informed her mother and her guards about Tatsuya's invitation. Yasaka agreed to it, but told her to be careful as it has only been a few days since the hero faction attacked her, and ordered her guards to follow them in secret without disturbing them. Tatsuya and the others who were waiting outside the hotel for Kunu were talking to each other as the girls who had not came to Kyoto before were asking about the places that they could visit from the experienced bunch. Tatsuya, who was sitting on a bench, suddenly noticed a blonde-haired girl wearing a shrine maiden outfit running towards them.
Tatsuya ni.
Kunu, who saw the group, immediately started running faster and was about to jump on Tatsuya, but Himari caught her and said, Whoa, not so fast, Kunu-chan. Don't forget about us." Kunu, who was caught in Himari's arms, tried to struggle her way out but was unable to. Finally giving in, she sighed and hugged Himari and said, "Long time no see, Himari. I missed you." Himari smiled at her response and hugged her back and said, "I missed you too, Kunu-chan. Let's have fun together." Soon the other girls started to gather around Kunu and Himari and started introducing themselves to the new girl. All of them were excited to meet Kunu, especially Zenovia and Irina, who had not ever seen a shrine maiden. They happily introduced themselves along with Isami, who was curious as she could feel that the girl was a Yukai, but couldn't point out which one is currently Kunu was in her human form. Tatsuya then interrupted their introduction and said, "Well, it's nice and all to introduce yourselves, but let's get going and look around before it gets too late. You can talk while we are walking." All of them nodded and then discussed which place to visit first. Tatsuya left the decision to them as he didn't have any problems anywhere they decided to go and let them do as they pleased. Tatsuya and the others who were walking around Kyoto, led by Kunu, who decided to take the role of the guide, were happy as the atmosphere around them was peaceful compared to what they had been experiencing for a while. No fights against the Cows Brigade, no training, no school. They were totally happy that nothing of such sort was happening, and Tatsuya felt happy as well since there was no danger from the Cows Brigade now, as he had taken care of the hero faction not too long ago. "Can you really eat all that?" Tatsuya turned around and saw Zenovia looking at him curiously. He then looked at his hands, which were full of different food items that he was planning to eat, and said, "Yeah, without a doubt. But if there is anything that you want, then feel free to take some." Zenobia looked at the food items and then said, "Then don't mind if I do," and took a bit of every time, as she was a but interested in the food as well. The others, who looked at the two gluttons, just sighed and let them do what they pleased. They came here to enjoy, and if the two were enjoying eating, then they didn't have any problems with it. Kunu looked at the two and said, "If you two eat too much, then you will get fat." Tatsuya just looked at her and said, "Don't worry, I will burn the fat later at night," and smiled, making the girls blush immediately, and Kunu immediately looking away in embarrassment. Zenobia looked towards Tatsuya with a neutral expression on her face and said, "You will be working out at night? Then I guess I will join you during your workout." Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan look on his face, while the other girls looked at her with pity. Irina as well prayed to God to give her friends some common sense. Tatsuya just took something from the bunch of food from his hands and moved it towards Zenovia's mouth, who just took a bite without hesitation. "Seriously, just how much lack of common sense do you have?" and patted her head, making the already confused girl tilt her head. Tatsuya and the others just sighed and decided to drop the topic and continue their tour. On the way, Tatsuya and the others met Kiba and his group and talked to each other for a while. Tatsuya invited him and his group to have lunch with him, but they all refused as they still had some places that they had to visit. All of them just continued their tour and later dropped Kuna back at the Yukai faction and greeted Yasaka and Serafall. Yasaka asked to let the others stay the night at the Yukai faction, but Tatsuya and his group rejected as they had to report back to their teachers, and they didn't want to be under the surveillance of the others during the trip. Later in the evening, Tatsuya and the others came back to the hotel and met with Rosweiss, and Shurisho just came back as well. Both of them greeted the others, and Shuri immediately dragged the others to the bath, as she had come to know that currently the bath was totally free and they could have it for themselves, unless someone came in late as well. Tatsuya too decided to take his bath since it was free as well. He didn't like to be in with his other male classmates, since they would always pester him to set them up with some girls or tell his own experiences with others. Once they were gone and were in their respective bathing areas, Isami suddenly said, "All right, time to peek on him," and stood up with a serious expression on her face. All the other girls looked at Isami in surprise for a while, but soon sighed seeing their antics. Kagura then said, "Why are you getting so excited? Haven't you already seen him naked before?" Isami smirked and said, "That is that, and this is this. Just imagine Tatsuya in a bath with completely wet body and hair. Isn't it stimulating in a different way?" she said with a bit of blood coming out of her nose. All the others looked at her for a while and then started to think what she just said, and Asia immediately said, "I will be taking my leave first. Don't mind me." But just as she tried to walk away, Himari caught her leg and said, Now, Asia, don't be like that. I will accompany you. Or better, you can stay here and I take my leave first. You should bathe for a bit longer." Rosweiss, who saw what was happening, said, "Everyone don't act shamefully like this. You have to maintain your image." Shuri patted her shoulder and said, "Don't be like that, Rosweiss. It is their time to enjoy such things. Let them do what they want. You two must have done same things with your crush when you were at their age, right?" Rosweiss immediately blushed and said, "WW, what are you talking about? I have never done something so shameless." Seeing her reaction, all of them were speechless, and Shuri immediately grabbed both her shoulders and said, "Looks like this one needs the peeping treatment the most. Okay, Isami-chan, I guess you have already found a peeping spot for the men's area." Isami just grinned and said, "That's the first thing I did when I came to the hotel in the morning." All of them got speechless and thought at the same time, she really has a passion for her things. Shuri have a fake cough and said, "Okay, Rosweiss, wear your clothes, we are going to start your treatment." Rosweiss, who still had a blush on her cheek, said, "Like I said, I am not going to do some tea-dash." Shuri leaned closer to her and said, "Are you sure? You are getting the opportunity to see your boss's fully chiseled naked body. Do you really want to give up this chance? Just imagine about what all you can see." Rosweiss shuddered hearing the whispers near her ears and tried to imagine what she just heard, and her cheeks started to get redder and redder with the more she thought. Seeing that her words were working, Shuri smirked and then whispered once again, "What? Started imagining already? But it looks like you can't imagine what he is like in the bottom, right?" And Rosweiss immediately gulped her saliva. Shuri, who noticed her reaction, knew that she was spot on and said, "Then why don't you go with him and widen the horizons of your knowledge? If you really plan on doing something like that, first learn to discuss about it quietly." All of them got surprised when they heard the familiar voice and started looking around. Up here, all of them immediately turned their heads and saw Tatsuya looking at all of them from the top of the wooden wall, which was in between the male and female sections. "I was just behind this wall and you all were making a fuss from that side. At least control your volume when you are discussing something like this." All of them blinked in surprise on being lectured about something, but suddenly Rosweiss realized something and crouched down, hiding her body with her hands. "Kaya, I have been defiled now. I cannot marry anymore." Chapter 222. Alcohol is injurious to health. After the incident, all of them decided to get out of the bath. There was an awkward atmosphere around Rosweiss, and she was keeping a distance from Tatsuya. The others who saw that didn't think much about it, except for Shuri, who occasionally pushed Rosweiss towards Tatsuya's direction. Tatsuya, who noticed that, looked at Shuri and asked, I am thinking that the salaries of some of my employees is quite high." And Shuri immediately took some distance from Rosweiss. She kept on smiling without looking towards Tatsuya's direction. Roswai sighed and then looked towards Tatsuya to thank him, but once her gaze fell on her boss, she immediately averted her eyes with a blush on her face. Tatsuya just ignored that and said, "Well, let's go and have our dinner." All of them simply nodded their heads without thinking much about it and went to the restaurant side of the hotel. After they were done eating, the girls decided to rest up for tonight, as they still had a lot of places to cover tomorrow, and went to their rooms. Tatsuya, Roswais, and Shuri, who were left behind, were drinking along with Azazel, who joined them after he was done with some of his paperwork. Azazel and Shuri were discussing about how unlucky Barakiel was, while Tatsuya and Roswais just silently listened to them while drinking. They just give their opinions either on Barakiel or Odin in between their talks, and then silently listen to the conversation while drinking. Once Shuri and Azazel were wasted after having a drinking contest, Tatsuya just sent them to their room and sat down comfortably on the chair. He was not in the mood for sleeping, as he has been doing so for the past few days at Yasaka's house. He looked at her silver-haired secretary, who was just on the verge of being wasted, and asked, "Ross, want to go out right now to get in some fresh air?" Roswais looked at Tatsuya and blinked her eyes in confusion for a while. Tatsuya, who noticed that, used his magic to get some of the alcohol out of her system, making her a bit sober. Roswais, who was now about sober, was able to process what Tatsuya said a bit clearly and just nodded with a blush on her face. Tatsuya nodded and took Roswais' hand and teleported away from the bar after placing the money on the table. Immediately both of them appeared on top of the Kyoto Tower, and Tatsuya made a cushion for both of them sit on and looked towards Roswais and said, "Shall I remove all the alcohol out of you and make you sober? You are wobbling a bit." But Roswais ignored him and took the bottle that she brought with herself and started gulping down. Tatsuya immediately caught her hand once he saw her wobbling too much and slowly made her sit down on the cushion and himself lie down on his after placing a magic on Roswais so as to not make he fall of the tower. Tatsuya just silently stared at the sky with Roswais silently drinking her alcohol, but all of a sudden Tatsuya said, "I know that it is water, so you can drop the act now, or you will have to rush to the bathroom." And Roswais immediately flinched and looked at Tatsuya with a surprised expression on her face. Tatsuya looked back at her with a smile on his face and said, "Before you ask, I already knew it from the beginning." Roswais, whose mouth was slightly open, entered her to ask something, immediately closed, and she looked away. Tatsuya just sighed and said, "You don't have to worry, I am not going to take advantage of you." Roswais looked at Tatsuya with a surprised expression on her face, seeing that Tatsuya realized about what she was thinking. "No, I am not thinking about that." Tatsuya looked at Roswais and just stared at her, making her uncomfortable. Finally, you able to bear his gaze, she looked away and said, "Maybe I thought a little about it." "A little."
Fine.
"Yeah, I has been thinking about that for a while now." "Good. You should be honest with yourself, and sorry for making you feel uncomfortable." Roswais nodded and said, "You should be." Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan look on his face and said, "Seriously, you should be shaking your hands and say, 'No, it's all right. No need to be sorry,' with uncush on your face at this part. Looks like the rumors about you being uptight, being unable to find a boyfriend because of it were true." And immediately the aura around Roswais darkened, and she said, "It's not my fault for being like that. I am just a virgin ex Valkyrie. Even I want to do pervy things with my boyfriend. And you don't have to say anything. Because of you, my body is now defiled and I will never be able to marry anybody." Tatsuya, who immediately caught her arms, which were ready to fire spells at him, tried to calm down the raging silver-haired lady but was not making any progress. "Then how about I take responsibility for you for your defiled body?" And immediately Roswais stopped and the black aura around her started to die down. "And how are you going to take responsibility for that? Just the same way that you are thinking right now?" Hearing that, Roswais immediately flinched and said, "Are you able to read my mind?" Tatsuya smirked and then telepathically said, "Even better that you can read your own mind," which made Roswais even more shocked. Wait a minute, do you mean that he have been reading my thoughts for quite some time now?" She then immediately hid her face behind her palms and started sobbing and said, "I have been mentally defiled as well." Seeing his secretary crying, Tatsuya sighed and started patting her back to console her and gave her a bottle of high-quality alcohol to make her mental health stop degrading any further. Roswais snatched the bottle off Tatsuya's hand and immediately started gulping down the content in it. "Hey, dilute it first. It's very strong." But she ignored him and gulped down the whole bottle in one go. She then threw the bottle away and turned around to look at Tatsuya with a flushed face. "She is totally drunk now. Let's take her back to her room." But before he could do anything, Roswais pushed him back, got on top of him and grabbed his collar and said, "Are you really going to take responsibility?" and looked at him with narrowed eyes. "Let's agree to her demands for now to let the matter settle down soon." "Yeah. Really? Yeah, really. You are not planning on going back on your words, are you?" "Have I ever gone back on my words?" Roswais stared at Tatsuya's face for a while and then made a magic circle while summoned a sheet of paper. She then lifted Tatsuya's hand and used her magic to form a small cut on Tatsuya's thumb and then pressed his thumb against the paper. She then smiled with a foolish grin on her face and hugged the sheet tightly. He. Now you cannot go back on your words. Finally. I too have a boyfriend now." And then sent the paper back to and hugged Tatsuya tightly and said, "You cannot leave me now." Tatsuya looked at the silver-haired lady lying on top of him and said, "Actually, it is the opposite. It is you who cannot go back and move a bit away. You are way too drunk." Rosweiss used her hands to support her body and look at Tatsuya with a neutral expression on her face, but soon a grin formed on her face, and she hugged him once again and said, "He, I got a boyfriend." Tatsuya looked at his secretary and said, "I should have given her a weaker alcohol. She has lost her reasoning." Tatsuya just sighed and let the drunk woman do what she wanted and closed his eyes and thought, she would be making quite a lot of ruckus in the morning anyway. Let's just lie here till then. Chapter 223, Contract. The next morning Tatsuya felt some movement on his chest, put the console that was in his hand back to his storage, and waited for his secretary to clear her mind. My head hurts like hell. Rosweiss sat up while grabbing her head with her eyes shut, complaining about her hangover. "I told you to dilute it a bit." "Sorry, my bee dash." By suddenly she opened her eyes widely and looked at Tatsuya, and soon her cheeks started to get redder. "Before you start to complain about sexual harassment or anything else, let me tell you, you were the one who pushed me down and got on top of me after you were drunk. So I am the victim here." Rosweiss, who got the sudden information, was totally shocked and said, "WW, what are you talking about? There is no way I would have done something like that." Tatsuya looked at her with a frown and said, "So now you are going to act like that, huh? Even though you did all that in the name of taking responsibility for that incident, and now after doing all this you are refusing to take responsibility. How can you be such a horrible person? You even made me forcibly sign some paper that you summoned with you, our magic circle. You are really cruel." Rosweiss immediately got off from Tatsuya and said, "There is no way that I would do something like that, and what document are you talking abo-?" She paused midway, and her expression immediately changed, as if she realized something. She then formed a magic circle and summoned a paper once again and stared at it intensely. After staring at it for a while, her body felt weak, and she fell on her knees and the paper fell from her hand. Tatsuya, who already knew what the paper was, still took the paper to fit in the roll more correctly and read it. "You actually had a marriage certificate completely filled except for my signature. How much desperate were you for a boyfriend?" Tatsuya thought to himself. He then looked at Rosweiss, who had an expression of disbelief in her eyes. Her gaze met with Tatsuya's, and both of them stared at each other for a while. Tatsuya, who thought that he had messed with her enough, was about to tell her about what actually happened, but out of nowhere Rosweiss bowed in front of Tatsuya and said, "I am sorry for defiling you with this body of mine. I know that I cannot ask for forgiveness about such a situation, but I promise that I am going to take full responsibility for my actions." Tatsuya sighed, seeing how serious his secretary was. He was about to say something, but once again Rosweiss interrupted her and said, "You may have already seen that certificate now, and yes, it is a legitimate marriage certificate given to me by my grandmother, and since I have forcibly made you sign it, I am going to go through it to the end. Once again I ask for forgiveness for my actions while I was drunk." Tatsuya just stared at Rosweiss, who was staring back at him, but soon a blush appeared on her cheeks, and she looked away and said, "Don't stare at me like that." Seeing her acting like that, Tatsuya really wanted to tease her more but didn't give in to his temptations and asked, "Are you really sure with this? I mean, if you want we can just tear apart this contract and then dash." Rosweiss looked at Tatsuya and said, "I am totally fine with this. I have no intentions of going back on my word. Besides, you don't have to feel guilty that I am doing this without my will. I will be totally honest here. Except for you having a harem part, you are totally my type. A handsome young man with a bright future who takes care of his partner. I am totally satisfied with this, and I am even ready to share you with the other girls since this is my fault." Tatsuya just signed and said, "Just hear me out," and started telling her about what actually happened. After Tatsuya was done telling her about what actually happened, Rosweiss was backing her head with the roof of the Kyoto Tower while having a blush on her face. Tatsuya, who saw this, just let her do what she wanted, till she was able to calm herself. After waiting for a while, Tatsuya stooped her started healing her swollen and bleeding forehead. "Just calm down now, it was partly my fault for giving you alcohol at that time." Rosweiss, who tears in her eyes, was looking at Tatsuya with a slight blush and a bloodied forehead. Seeing her expression, Tatsuya sighed and wiped the blood off her face and said, "There, back to your beautiful self." Rosweiss, who was totally embarrassed by the current situation, was not able to look at Tatsuya properly, but still managed to look in his eyes. She gulped his saliva and said, Thank you." Tatsuya just smiled and said, "No problem. I was at fault as well. So shall we go back?" Rosweiss just meekly nodded her head and stood up and patted the dust off her clothes. Tatsuya stood up as well and said, "So shall we destroy this pod dash?" But Rosweiss immediately snatched the paper from Tatsuya's hands and said, No, don't." And both of them continued to stare at each other. Rosweiss gave a fake cough and said, This is not a simple marriage contract." Tatsuya, who heard that, scanned the contract, and immediately his eyes widened in surprise and said, "Why the hell are you carrying such a cursed item for marriage hunting?" Rosweiss started shaking her head and said, No, I am not at fault here. Well, I am a bit at fault here, but still that's not the problem. This thing here is made by my grandmother, who made this when I was fussing too much about having a boyfriend to the point she got annoyed and made this contract. Your grandmother made a contract for death if this is ever destroyed or the rules are not followed for your marriage. I really want to meet such a loving grandma, so I don't think that it would be wise to destroy this." Tatsuya thought for a while and said, "Seems the best choice to me. This is even more well-made than the one I was blackma. Asterisk requested to make by the other girls, and it looks like nullifying this will have the same result. Seriously, your grandma is hella scary. I don't want to get on her bad side." Rosweiss blushed in embarrassment and then said, Does that mean we are a couple from now on? Duh. What else would you be after you made him sign something like that? Suddenly a voice was heard by the two which made Rosweiss surprised and Tatsuya sigh in annoyance. So you finally decided to join us, huh, Kurumi? And in an instant Kurumi materialized beside Tatsuya. Welcome to the inner circle, Secretary-san. No, now you are a sister, huh? So Rosweiss. Rosweiss pointed her finger at Kurumi and asked, since when you were here? Kurumi tilted her head to the side and said, I was with you all since last night's dinner. You really can go wild while being drunk. Kurumi placed a hand on her shoulder and with a smile on her face said, you are going to take responsibility for what you did, right? Hearing the word responsibility, Rosweiss immediately became serious and said, yes, I am ready to take responsibility, and as I said earlier, I am very happy to be in a relationship with him, huh? Kurumi patted her back and said, good, good. Now then let's tell the news to the others. Tatsuya got a new wifey, and teleported away. Rosweiss blinked in surprise and said, WW, just happened. Tatsuya looked at Rosweiss band, patted her head and said, you just got a ticket to spend your first wedding night with me, future wife Ross-chan. Rosweiss blushed on hearing that, and immediately tried to separate herself from Tatsuya, but stumbled on the roof. Tatsuya immediately caught her hand and said, now don't be that nervous, you said that I was your type, right, and we have known each other for quite a while now, so don't get flustered so easily, and pulled her back and made her stand properly. Tatsuya then bowed his head a bit and then said, well, I am a bit late, but still let's do this, Rosweiss, will you hoe out with me? Although you literally have no choice in this case. I promise that I won't cause you any trouble, well except for the training part. Rosweiss also bowed her head although a bit in a hurry and said, yes, I am happy, let's get along in future. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Tatsuya looked at her and said, giving you a proper confession, although it is meaningless as you made me sign that contract, but still I thought that you would be happy if you got a proper confession. Rosweiss stared at Tatsuya for a while and then sighed and said, the first confession I ever got was one where I had no choice about it. I really am unlucky in these kind of things. Tatsuya chuckled seeing Rosweiss' expression and patted her head and said, don't worry, even if you were not so lucky in this situation, I promise you that you won't regret it in future. She looked at Tatsuya who was patting her head and asked, why are you patting my head? Well, it is calming. She just stared at him for a while, and then let him pat her head as it was indeed a bit calming. Chapter 224, Meeting the New Council. The incident about the cursed contract was over, and all the girls congratulated Rosweiss for finally being in a relationship, and although she felt that it was a bit wrong as it was because of the contract, the other girls cheered her and told her to just go with the flow and not think too much about it. All of them soon returned back to Kuo as their trip was finally over, and now the Devils were preparing for their next event after their relaxing trip, the youth rating games. Isami, who had been defeated by Sarorg once, was now thoroughly taught her, trained by the others along with Saji, who was also training under Tatsuya, as he requested him to train him once again. Rosweiss as well was now being trained more severely, so as to not being overshadowed by the rest of Tatsuya's group. There was a new determination in her as the tutor. Training was actually doing wonders for her, making her enthusiastic as she had something new to focus on. Tatsuya himself was now quite busy as he had taken a week-long vacation and was now back to his hectic life with his clones back to work. The other noteworthy things that happened were Ravel joining the Kuo Academy, much to Kaniko's annoyance, though she was now a bit happy as her classmate Nekishu gave her some tricks for her growth, which made Tatsuya slightly sad. A few days passed by, and currently Tatsuya and his group were preparing to VO to the underworld for the raiding game between Rias and Sarorg. Tatsuya looked at the girls and said, okay, we will be going now, but make sure to not cause any trouble, and you too, while pointing at Ruya and Ophis, don't let anyone know your identity by releasing your aura. I have already suppressed it, but don't go overboard because of that. And you, Kuroka, just ignore anyone who try to mess with you. I have already asked Surzex to clear your name, so there won't be any problem. And last but not the least, Asia, don't pick a fight with someone who tried to accuse you for Diodora. All four of them just nodded their heads in approval. Tatsuya nodded as well and looked at Rosweiss, who made a magic circle to Underworld. A few moments later, all of them appeared in front of a building, which they presumed to be the stadium where the raiding game was going to take place. They were about to walk in, but suddenly all of them heard a voice. Hey, so you guys finally came, huh? They turned around and saw Azazel coming towards them along with Surzex, Graphia, and Seraphal. All of them greeted each other and said, yup, so anything interesting going on? Azazel shrugged his shoulder and said, nothing much, just meeting with some gods for peace and all. Nothing of your interest. So who are you betting on for today's game? Sarorg, but if Rias has some cards up her sleeves, then the matter is different. Hearing that, all three of them were surprised, and Azazel asked, immediate answer, you really don't believe in your friends much, right? Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, I have overseen the training of two of Rias's teammates, and I have been in contact with the others of his group as well and given pointer to all of them, so I am more than aware of their powers. Though Gasper can change the whole situation of the game if he used the move which I taught him at the right moment. This time, even Tatsuya's group got curious hearing what he said, and Surzex asked, what move? Tatsuya smiled and said, where's the fun in telling you now? Wait for the surprise. Surzex just sighed and nodded his head, but soon he turned back to his cheerful self and said, don't worry, Ryutan will surprise you all. He then looked at Tatsuya with a smirk and said, you are not the only one who have been giving pointers. Even Ryutan is serious this time and has asked for help from her Oni-chan. Though someone doesn't let me enjoy those moments. And glanced towards the silver-haired maid standing behind him. Graphia glared at him and said, you were fooling around the whole time on the first day she came to ask for your guidance. As a Mao, it is totally unsightly seeing you acting like that, and it is also my job to make sure that you do your work on time. Surzex wanted to refute, but just as he saw the ice-cold glare from Graphia's eyes, he immediately turned around and said, well, let's get going. The match could start any moment now. And started walking towards the stadium. The rest of them didn't thought much about it, and just followed behind him, but soon all of them stopped when they saw a group of people coming towards them. Surzex looked at the group with a smile and said, good evening to you, Lord Bale. Are you here to watch your son's match? The new Devil Council just stopped and looked towards Surzex and the group behind him. Lord Bale then looked back at Surzex and said, no, we just came to check whether the preparations were well made or not. After all, a lot of people from other factions will be coming to see our raiding games from now on. Tatsuya looked at the new council and saw some familiar faces in the group, though seeing someone there immediately made him feel like punching the person's face, and the fake smile on the person's face while looking at him just made the feeling even stronger. The said person just came forward and said, it's been a while, right, Shiba-kun? Tatsuya smiled back and said, it certainly has been quite a while, Lord Gremory. Looks like you are a councilman now. Congratulations. Ha ha ha, thanks a lot for that. They just wanted some experienced personnel after someone killed most of the councilmen during the youth meet, and miraculously even I was selected. You mean by bribe, right? Tatsuya thought. Tatsuya, who was still smiling, said, well, whatever might the reason be, you still became a councilman is a thing to celebrate. I just hope the thing that happened to the previous councilmen don't happen to you. And immediately Zeoticus's smile got a bit stiff, but he still said, yeah, I hope so as well. Right, we still had a lot of work to do. So shall we get going, gentlemen? The rest of the council looked towards Lord Bale, who just nodded and started walking away. Once they were a nod in their sight, the whole Tatsuya's group thought at the same time, I really wanted to punch his face. Tatsuya looked at his group and said, Shizuka, you can now release Asia. Shizuka released Asia's hand, which was being held by her, and said, why the hell were you crushing my hand? Asia just smiled and said, I just wanted to express my feeling to him with my fists. Sorry, got a bit out of control there. Shizuka raised her hand, which was completely swollen, and said, are you calling this just a bit? Asia just playfully stuck out her tongue, and then started healing Shizuka. Chapter 225. Meeting the participants. After Asia was done healing Shizuka, all of them, once again started walking towards the waiting rooms. After entering the Gremory group's waiting room, all of them saw each of them either warming up or trying to calm themselves. Rias and the others who glanced towards the door to see the visitors were happy seeing them, but before anyone could say anything, Surzex walked towards Rias and stared at her with a serious expression on his face. Rias stared back at her brother for a while with a serious expression as well and said, we will win. Surzex smiled and patted her head and said, do your best. Rias pouted and moved Surzex's hand away from her head and said, don't do that, Oniai-sama. Riatan, who was pouting, is cute as well. But suddenly he felt someone grab his ear, and it didn't even took a second for him to understand who the person was. Graphia looked at the others and said, well then, ladies and gentlemen, Surzex-sama has a lot of guests to entertain, so we will be leaving first. Best of luck to you all, and Tatsuya-sama and the others, please call me when all of you are done with your talks. I will guide you all to your seats. Wait a minute. Riatan needs her Oniai-chan here to motivate her. It's my responsibility as her Oniai-chan to take care of this. She must be waiting for her Oniai-chan to give her a loving hug. Graphia looked at Surzex with a glare, making him stop struggling, and said, do I need to remind you that you are a mouse, Surzex-sama? And then started dragging him away. Serafal soon followed them as she too had to greet the guests. Azazel left them as well as he had some matters to take care of. Now that only the Gremory and Shiba group were present, Tatsuya looked at all of them and said, as a friend, here's an advice from me. Don't get overconfident in the game, especially you, Rias. Rias looked at Tatsuya with a surprised expression on her face and asked, why me specifically? Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan look on his face and asked, do I even need to tell you how you won your first game? Rias, who was now reminded of her victory against Riser, just averted her eyes and with a pot on her face said, you don't need to talk like that. I won't do something stupid this time around. I have been even training how you instructed me to. Hearing that, all of them were surprised, making Rias twitch her brows and ask, does the fact that I was training for the game that surprising? All of them didn't say anything and just stared at her, making her pissed at her friends. Fine, then I will show you all how serious I am and how hard I have worked for this. She then pointed towards Tatsuya and said, so make sure to watch me. Tatsuya, who saw the serious look on her face, was a bit surprised as this time he genuinely felt that she was determined. He chuckled, making Rias glare at her, thinking that he was making din of her. Tatsuya then looked at her and said, then how about this? If you were able to show me that you were determined and worked hard for the game through your actions, then I will fulfill one of your requests, though just a simple one, not anything supernaturally, just simple thing that normal people can do. Once again, all the people in the room were surprised by Tatsuya's declaration, but Rias smirked and said, don't go back on your words. I can ask you anything that a normal person can do, right? Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, yup. Tatsuya then started walking towards the door and said, I am now going to check on Sarorg and his group. Best of luck to you all. Oh, and Isami, of your performance was poor, be prepared to experience hell. Isami, who heard him, flinched and said, Hey, why am I the only one who is threatened? Tatsuya just ignored her and left the room to meet the other group. Soon he came to Sarorg's waiting room and knocked on the door. Soon the door was opened by Keisha, who was surprised to see Tatsuya, but immediately a smile came on her face, and she hugged him. Tatsuya hugged her back and said, I missed you. Kisha, who was hugging him, pinched him and said, like I can't believe that from someone who is surrounded by girls 24/7. Tatsuya chuckled and said, I am telling the truth though. Kisha stopped pinching him and said, fine, whatever. So who are you here? Tatsuya broke the hug and said, just came to visit you before the match to make sure that you are not nervous. Kisha smiled and said, then your visit is wasted. Sorry, but I am not nervous. Not nervous, huh? Then we can say that I came here just to meet you. If you are just here to flirt, then just go back. Don't ruin the mood before the match. Tatsuya looked at the voice who said that, and saw Coriana looking at the two of them. Kisha just smiled and said, now, don't be jealous. Just because you recently had a breakup? And immediately Coriana had some tick marks on her forehead. Tatsuya, who saw that a fight was about to start between the two girls, looked towards the other males and said, yo, ready for the game? All of them looked at him with enthusiasm and nodded their heads, and Sarorg said, heh, we will show them how hard we have worked for this by winning. More importantly, when are you going to fight me? Tatsuya sighed at the battle maniac's question and said, I will think about it. So let's talk about it later. Sarorg nodded and said, fine, but don't forget about our spar. Tatsuya nodded and said, well then I will not disturb you, also do your best. All of them just nodded and thanked Tatsuya, who was walking towards the exit, but his hand was grabbed by someone. He then turned around and saw Kisha looking at him. Tatsuya smiled and made a soundproof and invisibility barrier around him and kissed Kisha, who started to kiss him back. After a while, Tatsuya separated himself from her and said, once this game is over, let's go out on a date. Kisha smiled and nodded her head and gave him another peck on the lips and said, cheer for me. Tatsuya smiled and caressed her cheek and said, I will, but I am not going to be partial. And immediately she pinched his waist and with a smile on her face said, I know. She then got out of his embrace and said, now get going, the match is about to start. Tatsuya smirked and bit her earlobe and said, then see you later, and teleported away from the room, leaving behind a slightly blushing Kisha, who was now visible to everyone as the barrier was now gone. Coriana looked at her fellow female teammate and said, you really like to rub it off, don't you? Kisha looked at her and said, what? It's not like you saw what we did? Coriana snorted and said, oh, please, I can easily see what is going on your mind right now, and I don't even require any kind of power for that. You lewd blondie. That's what you were called, though. Coriana clicked her tongue and just looked away from Kisha, not wanting to continue the argument.
That is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please drop a comment down below.